All right. I feel like I'm on a struggle bus, but it's all good. And welcome to day 10. So, um, I'm roughly going to do like literally the same thing I did yesterday, but I wanted to say that a part of or I added a new video to the AI news playlist earlier, and that's the one I'm going to be watching today, which is so today there was a Senate subcommittee hearing on copyright and generative AI. So, with that being said, the hearing from yesterday was um, a different subcommittee, and then that's a part of they're going to have a series of hearings, but that's more the actual technology committee. The copyright hearing, I don't know much about, the general context, so I'm going to watch the entire hearing today. It's like, let's see, how long is it? It's 2.5 hours, which is not quite as long as the other one was that we watched yesterday, and we made it all the way through to the end, even though I was up to like 3 o'clock in the morning. So this one shouldn't take as long, I guess. I'm gonna start it here in a minute. So 2 o'clock in the morning ish, we'll see. But it doesn't matter. I just want to get this information in. I want to keep up to date. And I feel like we were having good dialogue about it yesterday, as folks were kind of checking in and out throughout the stream. So, yeah. Um, I did add this to the playlist. So now, youtube.com. Oops. Hold on. Forward slash. I know this is like going into the wrong tab, Joe. I'm sorry, but I'm a little struggly today on my production skills. But here, I'll put this back here for now because the music is still playing technically. But Marissa, hello, welcome, Madam Mod. Uh, yeah. So on the channel, here, I'm gonna put the channel in the chat right here, but a lot of people, if you're on YouTube, then you're already on YouTube. If you're on Twitch, then the coding YouTube, there's a link in the Twitch bio that literally says coding YouTube. Um, Otherwise, I'm gonna put this link here too. But anyway, so I feel like almost every day I have like one update to this page, which is making me feel like I'm getting something done. And then I'll go back to like posting shorts and stuff once I get some other stuff figured out. But yeah. So yesterday we found I talked about this. There's an AI news tab on the homepage now, and I did go ahead and add the hearing for today. So I've been watching the CNBC ones, and hopefully that's not like an offensive thing. I don't know, because I don't like usually talk about like politics or things like that within streams and everything. So I hope it won't come off as that, but it's policy in our industry. So I'm absolutely going to pay attention to that, and I think it's important to show that there are those of us that follows this type of work in the industry as well, especially since I am also interested in research. So anyways, the second I'll just keep adding to this playlist. So um it is there for you all, the AI news playlist. And then people can give me feedback if you think that there's other things I can be adding. And then I'll be branching out into, I'm kind of going, a little bit by a little bit, but I'll be branching out into doing more stuff in the community tab. And also, um, I'm going to do my first series on YouTube. So that'll be coming up soon. I've been doing a lot of Git and GitHub and open source stuff lately. So I'm going to do probably like Git and GitHub, because I think that's literally the first thing I talked about in the Crawl Walk Run show as well. So, Yeah, so we'll see. But just little updates. Everything's slowly coming along. Um, so tonight I'm gonna do my log really quick, and then I'm really just kind of gonna get to letting this hearing play out, and we'll see. We'll see. So what are you up to, Mirza? And don't accidentally clear our chat this time. I'm calling you out. Here, let me close this. This is already open for me, so let's do this. And I know I'll probably be looking awkward when I be typing because my computer, like my keyboard, is so far away from me right now. I know you did, me too. It was just funny. It freaks me out when I see like mod cleared the entire chat. Like it makes me feel like, like because sometimes people come in trolling or you get like view botted or something like that. So it's been a while since I have had anything like that happen. But when I look down and all of a sudden I see like the whole chat is clear, yeah, that freaks me that freaks me out a little bit. Not gonna lie. But then I was looking at the history, I didn't see anything, so I was like, oh, okay, it was fine. Then you're like, oh, it was a mistake. It's like, okay, it's good, it's good. I'm just messing with you for real. Um So this one is on generative AI and copyright law. Okay. It didn't pop up this time. Yeah, I know you probably knew now this time. Like, be careful. Be careful. Okay, so day 10, I'm still finishing chapter 1. And I must say, if I do, say so myself, I think I did a pretty good job yesterday, even though I didn't read like an extensive amount of the material. I went through all of the material that was covering what the code snippets are doing and how that is interacting with the library as well. And I was still able to recap all of the information that I was trying to digest while I was listening to the hearing. So, I am at least, I wasn't trying to like, I knew I was like passively kind of doing both, but I still was trying to make sure I was actually getting something out of it. So, yeah, now let me get comfortable. I swear the main thing I need right now, y'all, is a chair. Like I need a new chair so bad. I do have my old chair. It's not bad per se, but it's kind of awkward the way I like to sit. Like because I like to put like either sit with one leg up or cross my legs. It's not really the best for that. So I do need a new chair, but I want something like ergonomic, probably with like a flat seat base with arms that flip up. So, because that's the only model, the arms that flip up is mainly the only like model where you can have arms, but then you can possibly cross your legs in the chair. So, if anybody wants to slide any recommendations my way, let me know. But the racer seats don't work very well because they're usually curved on the sides, which makes it awkward when you're trying to, yeah, like sit cross-legged in the chair. Just got back from the store. You okay? First of all, it said turn my brats into a spaghetti like dish. I I don't know why for it. I saw brats, like brats just popped out to me. Like the dolls. I'm like, why you have brats dolls? Where did you get brats dolls from? Then I'm like, oh, you talk about food. Okay. All right. So let me get to the point. Let me get to the point. Cause oh wait, did I push that? Let me see. Oh, I should put my okay. I'm sorry, y'all. I'm thinking so fast, but um It's all good as long as I keep myself targeted onto what I need to do. As long as I can refocus. So yesterday, I should say, I finished watching the hearing, and I was able to read through the image. Okay. So yeah, this is not like my ideal way to do things, but oh my goodness. I just you gotta do what you gotta do, man. I got 10, 11-month old. I keep saying 10 months. I got 11-month old. Got like 1,000 things going on. So sometimes you be trying to multitask, you know. I know I kind of get I get dangerously uh risky with the multitasking. Like, you know, I try to do some stuff at the same time that's like that ain't supposed to be done together. Um, but this is my real life. Let's see. Get status. Then Mirza's sitting here talking about food. I'm hungry. Why would you bring that up? Get Okay. Yeah, cause I'm like on autopilot a little bit, but hey, I I guess I achieved the May challenge. Yay! I've been trying to be more active, so it says you reached your move goal 9 times this month, which is kind of good since it's only the 17th. But I mean, it should be better. But I like when I get my little badges. I had an Apple Watch since like literally the first model, I think. So, Series 1. So, I've been tracking activity history since like 2017 or something. I don't know. Get commands. Okay, and I'll push this. So yeah, because I've been up all day long, and it's late for me, but it's just so important to me to just do this every day. And I'm like, I'm so early on, cause I have in the past given myself like the leeway to be like on top, especially since I'm also live streaming. I would be like, oh, you know, if I miss a day, I'll just make it up. And I'm not saying that that's not like something that I will, you know, have available to myself, but I'm really not trying to use it, especially not this early on. Because even though I feel like that's a helpful rule to have for myself, I do also recognize that, like, once I get to that point where I break my streak, it makes it easier to break and, you know, going forward. Like when you're trying to keep that streak going, that's one thing, but then as soon as I already broke it once, it tends to kind of happen a little bit more often. And this, you know, it is what it is, but I just feel like I'm gonna try to hold out until a day where it's like I absolutely, like, it's just really not happening. And maybe that day will never come and I'll finally do my freaking 100 days in a row. So the little things I be thinking about. Day 9 or 10. Today is day 10. So Everything should say day 10. That's another thing that's been kind of sort of stressing me out. It's not stressing me out, but it's annoying because when I do set the stream info, when I go live, for some reason, some of the information like reverts back to the previous day, even though I'm absolutely going in and changing everything. So I have been trying to like fix stuff. I try to look over it multiple times, but that's why I don't know why it's happening. Like the wrong titles will be up or um, the wrong description. So I went through, I guess I went to, here, let me go back to my notebook. I was going to say, I want to orient myself back at, I want to orient myself back at this tuning line because I don't think I quite got there yesterday. I have notes on transfer learning. Yeah, so see, here's transfer learning. Okay. So, yes, this is pretty much exactly where I left off. So, I'm going to pick up here and just keep working through because I'm just trying to finish this first chapter for the book. And then I will be moving on to lesson 2 and chapter 2, which is like deployment and stuff. So, right now, I'm not running my models just because it is time consuming, and by the time they are done training, I like am done with my stream and done with my coding session for the night anyways. So the deployment part will make that a lot better. So I'm just holding out until that chapter since that's literally the next thing that we'll do. All right, so let's go into our hearing. So this wonderful, wonderful music has to go away. One thing I was hoping I could have the captions up like I did yesterday, but unfortunately there's no captions on this video right now. So I'm just gonna try not to talk over them and maybe boost the audio on the hearing. But this video is, or this stream is 2 hours and 34 minutes. And that's pretty much all hearing. So we're going to jump into it now.
In preparation for this knows one of my favorite jokes on artificial intelligence, which I was telling long before it becoming a direct issue for this committee, and that is that artificial intelligence is what members have when their staff prepares their opening statements.
So, I guess I should try and do it this way.
Today, we stand at the intersection of two rapidly evolving domains.
Let me know how the audio is, if I should make the video any louder or anything like that. But for now, I'm going to leave it where it is and just let it start.
In preparation for this knows one of my favorite jokes on artificial intelligence, which I was telling long before it becoming a direct issue for this committee, and that is that artificial intelligence is what members have when their staff prepares their opening statements. So yes, today we stand at the intersection of two rapidly evolving domains: generative artificial intelligence and existing copyright law that must adapt to it. The advent of generative AI technologies has sparked a profound transformation in the creation, distribution, and consumption of a new form of creative work. As we embark in our legal journey, along with the administration in their regulatory powers, it is vital that we explore the complex relationship between generative AI and copyright law, recognizing both the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. Generative AI holds immense potential for innovative and artistic expression. It empowers creators to explore new frontiers, fueling their imagination with AI-generated content. Yet with the power that comes with it comes responsibility. Responsibility for negative activity on the web and of copyright laws being trampled. Copyright laws were designed to protect intellectual property. Copyright laws also exist under our Constitution specifically to encourage and then reward for creations. It's that encouragement that, in fact, creates the right of ownership, not the right of ownership having some core item. In this hearing, we aim to strike a delicate balance. Let me rephrase that in spite of what it says here. In this hearing, we recognize there's a delicate balance, and we would hope that our panel today represents both a diversity of views and a possible collaboration. We must consider, though, that there will be individuals on each side who will not want to move. There will be companies, which would include some of the household words, Microsoft, Meta, which is not yet a household word, but Facebook is, and in fact Google, that are on both sides of this issue, being both massive creators of their own copyright and massive users of others. It is our duty to adapt, refine copyright laws to accommodate the transformative potential of generative AI, while safeguarding the interest of existing creators and of the right of the society as a whole to benefit. Generative AI presents both challenges and opportunities for creative works and copyright holders. It requires thoughtful consideration and ongoing discussion with stakeholders to strike a balance between protecting intellectual property rights, encouraging creativity, and fostering innovative content, AI-generated included. Today, all of us here understand that generative AI is nascent. As we receive briefings, we hear about first generation, second generation, third generation, now fourth generation. And by the way, the education of this young child is profound, from something that was hard to understand to something that said the wrong thing to something that now is so usable that we might often forget to fact check its output because it seems so good. But we must, first and foremost, address properly the concerns surrounding unauthorized use of copyrighted material, while also recognizing the potential of generative AI can only be achieved with massive amounts of data, far more than is available outside of copyright. By embracing a forward-thinking approach, we can establish guidelines to promote responsible and ethical practices in the realm of generative AI. As we embark on our legal journey, let us approach it with a spirit of collaboration, as those who were on the call the other day clearly were doing. Let us find common ground, seeking solutions that promote the flourishing of both creative expression and intellectual property protection. The stakes couldn't be higher, and the outcome will shape the future landscape of art, technology, and copyright. Today, let us navigate this uncharted territory to ensure that generative AI and copyright laws foster in the future a fairly harmonious and vibrant ecosystem for generations to come. In closing, I might say that we clearly could have substituted patent or other areas of innovation and use just as easily, and we would have been having substantially the same hearing, perhaps in some cases with different witnesses. And in that sense, I think it's important for us all to look at this. I will close by saying that it has come to my attention that for once, Congress may not do either of the things we're known for, which is nothing at all or overreact. But that's not true around the world. Spain is moving forward with what I think might be a very restrictive interpretation. Japan believes, apparently, that all information that goes into the teaching is in fact free of any copyright restriction in its use. I do not believe that today's discussion will take us down either road. I believe that we will measure carefully and find middle ground that respects existing copyright law while allowing the future of generative AI to flourish. And with that, I yield back and recognize the ranking member for his opening statement.
I thank the chairman for holding this hearing. I would assure those who are listening that Congress is getting more and more information about artificial intelligence and discussing the ramifications in all enterprises of human behavior. And I share your prediction that we will act and we will do so in a reasonable way. I don't know if we'll do the Japanese hardline position on inputs, though. I want to thank you for holding this hearing. Artificial intelligence is a promising technology with the potential to revolutionize a range of industries. But with that promise also comes potential peril, especially to the creators of art and other copyrightable works. It is critical that we think through the many ways that AI will change our lives and whether our existing laws are up to the challenge. I'm glad that we are beginning that process today. Among the many questions that we must confront as artificial intelligence takes on a larger role in our society is how our copyright system should view AI, both in terms of how we should treat copyrighted works that are used to train an AI model, in other words, the inputs, and whether the new work that is generated by AI, in other words, the outputs, should be eligible for copyright protection itself. Just as AI machine learning is a complex process, so too is our inquiry today, as there may not be simple answers to any of these questions. First, let's consider the inputs used to train AI systems. A typical generative AI system is fed vast amounts of human-authored work on which to train. This may include written word, visual art, and music. The model then processes this information with the help of various algorithms to detect patterns and probabilities. A foundational principle of copyright law generally requires users of copyrighted works to obtain the permission of the copyright owner. But while much of the input into generative AI systems tends to consist of works that are protected by copyright, these works are typically used without seeking consent or a license. Some argue that this constitutes fair use, and indeed, this question is being litigated in the courts as we speak. But I'm hard-pressed to understand how a system that rests almost entirely on the works of others and can be commercialized or used to develop commercial products owes nothing, not even notice, to the owners of the works it uses to power its system. Even if we determine that AI systems must seek permission to use copyrighted works, that only leads to more questions. For example, what sort of licensing system should be required? And what would represent fair compensation for these works? Other questions arise as well, such as what degree of transparency should be built into AI models, and how can we ensure that proper credit is attributed to copyrighted works? On the other side of the equation, we must consider the status of the works, the outputs that are generated by the AI model. Should a purely AI-generated work be eligible for copyright protection if it does not otherwise meet the definition of infringement? What if there was significant human creative involvement in generating the AI work? What about works that may be of a hybrid manner, consisting of both human authorship and elements that are purely AI. Whether or not an AI-generated work is eligible to be copyrighted, such works will compete, and indeed are already competing in the marketplace against human-authored works. No examination of AI is complete without considering the impact that AI works will have on human creators. How do we balance the need for innovation with the need to protect human creators? None of these questions have simple answers, and that's why I'm pleased that we are joined by such a distinguished panel of witnesses to help guide our subcommittee's inquiry into important copyright issues raised by the use of artificial intelligence. I'm interested to hear your perspective on these questions, as well as whether our existing copyright framework, including recent guidance issued by the U.S. Copyright Office, is sufficient to address these questions, or whether legislation is needed. I thank the chairman for holding this important hearing again, and I yield back the balance of my turn.
Thank the gentleman. In lieu of the chairman's opening statement, in addition to the opening statement I read, which was a hybrid of GPT and my staff, I also will put a pure opening statement that was done through regenerative AI into the record, and without objection, it will be placed in the record. I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Nadler.
I thank the gentleman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this important hearing. Yesterday, some of us were privileged to attend a briefing by Sam Altman on generative AI. 30 years ago, as the Internet was in its nascent stage, we were forced to grapple with a series of questions about how that then emerging technology would change our society and whether our laws were sufficient to address these new challenges. We are still wrestling with many of those issues today. Now a new technology, artificial intelligence, has emerged that has a similar potential to transform many aspects of our lives. And once again, as our technology evolves, we must determine if our laws must evolve as well. Although AI gives rise to a myriad of issues, today we are focusing on the intersection between artificial intelligence and copyright. Even within this limited sphere of the law, I find myself with far more questions than answers as we begin this inquiry. At its core, the fundamental question we must ask is, how can we promote innovation and further development of generative artificial intelligence models while also protecting the rights of creators whose works are the engine that fuels these models and who must compete with AI-generated work in the marketplace? This is not an easy balance to strike, and many answers just lead to more questions. For example, a typical AI model trains on vast quantities of data, analyzing the underlying text, images, or music as it learns to make predictions based on that information to generate new works. Much of the information on which these generative AI systems rely is found in copyrighted works. But typically, these works are used without seeking the permission of the copyright holder. And worse yet, there is little transparency as to which copyright works are used, thus preventing creators from asserting their rights. In effect, AI systems are generating new content based on their work, content that may one day directly compete with their work, but without their knowledge or consent, and certainly without compensation. This is a troubling development, but the solutions are far from clear. What is the proper way to license these works and to monitor compliance? And what sort of transparency and accountability should be built into these systems? It's time to begin considering these important issues. As we wrestle with these questions about how to treat the inputs into a generative AI system, there are equally thorny questions about the outputs. How should the copyright laws treat works that are generated by an AI model? The Copyright Office recently offered guidance on that question. According to the guidance, only works of, quote, human authorship are eligible for copyright protection. He goes on to explain that it is necessarily a fact-specific inquiry to determine where the line is between human work that is merely assisted by AI technology and works in which the traditional elements of authorship were actually conceived and executed by the AI model itself. To add further complexity, In some cases, certain aspects of a single work may be eligible for protection, while others are not. We must consider whether the Copyright Office has the tools and resources it needs to evaluate AI-related applications and to enforce existing rules. Finally, there are important questions about the impact that AI-generated works will have on the market for human-authored works, works that may have served as the foundation for generating the AI work in the first place. While we work to promote innovation in the AI realm, we must also ensure that artificial works do not displace human creators or threaten the ability of the creative class to thrive. Already, creators like the members of the Writers Guild of America are uniting to speak up for their own rights and to ensure that they are not replaced by AI systems. All these issues lead to a final set of questions. Strike the right balance between protecting creators and promoting innovation. These complex issues. Should we wait and see how AI technology evolves before taking any action, or let these issues play out in the courts? There are no easy answers, but I appreciate the opportunity to be thinking through these important questions with our distinguished panel of witnesses. I thank the chairman for holding this hearing, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. I now ask unanimous consent that an article titled, "Will AI Value Human Creators?" Now the time to decide the future of our culture, put it into the record. I now ask that that be placed in the record. I additionally ask, and I'll distribute copies, for unanimous consent that ChatGPT's answers for when we asked it to argue for regulation and when we asked it to argue against regulation be both put in the record. And I will say that it's a convincing argument in both directions. And with that, I now have the honor of introducing our distinguished panel. Mr. Cy Damley is a partner in copyright practice at Latham & Watkins. He is a former software engineer and specializes in technology matters, including those involving computer systems and networks and artificial intelligence. He is previously general counsel at the Copyright Office. All of those reasons and more is why you're here. Welcome. Mr. Colson
That was a good
Birch
mixture.
is an associate professor of computer and information science at the University of Pennsylvania. He is also a visiting research scientist at the Allen Institute for Artificial Intelligence. And welcome. Mr. Ashley Irwin. Mr. Irwin is president of the Society of Composers, Lyricists, and an Emmy Award-winning music director, conductor, composer, arranger, and producer who has scored over 30 featured films, 300 hours of television, and over 3,000 commercials. And I suspect the commercials probably made you the most as that sometimes goes. Mr. David Navarro. Mr. Navarro is a Grammy-nominated songwriter, singer, recorder, artist, voice actor. He was formerly in the duo Lauren and Navarro, released 13 albums, and performed over 1,500, this was done by my staff, not by AI, gigs, and is currently a solo artist who tours constantly, but has blessed us with a day off the road with no compensation, and for that we're very appreciative. Mr. Jeffrey Sidlick is the president and CEO of Plus Coalition, which is a global nonprofit initiative to make it easy and fast to search for, find, communicate, and understand information about photographs and visual artworks. Mr. Sedlick is also a member of the Joint Committee on Ethics in AI and a professional photographer. I want to welcome all of our witnesses, recognizing that this is a judiciary committee. I'm going to ask you to all rise to take the oath. And raise your right hand for the camera. Do you solemnly swear or affirm, under penalty of perjury, that the testimony you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and correct to the best of your knowledge, so help you God? Thank you. Please be seated. Let the record indicate that all witnesses answered in the affirmative. As you may know from watching C-SPAN, your entire record will be placed, your entire statement will be placed in the record, along with, without objection, any extraneous material you see fit now or in the next 5 days to include, so that as we go through this, if you realize there's something you should have said, would have said, or wanted to say, you'll be allowed to supplement.
So
With that, Mr.
next
Damling,
week
you're
on
first up for 5
Wednesday or
minutes.
Thursday, we should be good
Because
to
we have
review
a lot of people up on the dais that want to ask you questions.
between
I
this
will
hearing
ask
and
that each
yesterday's
of you Try
hearing.
to limit right to that 5 minutes or less. Gentleman's recognized.
Chairman Issa, Ranking Member Johnson, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to participate in today's hearing. I am a former software engineer, former general counsel of the U.S. Copyright Office, and currently a partner at the law firm Latham & Watkins, LLP. I'm here testifying solely in my personal capacity and not on behalf of my law firm, any of the firm's clients, or the U.S. Copyright Office.
Of course, the legal conversation started out with, I am not speaking on behalf
First, I would like to
of.
put those issues into context. The AI tools of the present and near future will impact almost every aspect of the human experience. They will improve our science and our medicine. They will make our military more effective. They will make our businesses more efficient and productive. They will enable anyone to more fully unlock their creative potential. In short, AI has the potential to transform our economy and improve our society as a whole. But that outcome is not guaranteed. The way we regulate AI will directly determine whether the United States will continue to lead the world in AI development or whether another country will take up that mantle. In considering whether to impose intellectual property-based restrictions on AI innovation, Congress should carefully evaluate whether those restrictions will hamper the development of AI here in the United States. At the same time, artists, writers, and other creators have expressed genuine concern that the rapid development of AI will displace human authors. Policymakers should take those concerns seriously. But taking a step back, it's important to appreciate that every new technological development has caused similar fears. And in hindsight, we can see that those fears have not come to fruition. To just take one example, when photography was invented in the mid-1800s, one prominent critic dismissed the medium as, quote, the refuge of every would-be painter too ill-endowed or too lazy to complete his studies. And he predicted that photography would, quote, corrupt art altogether. Now, I'm sure Mr. Sedlick can tell us how much he disagrees with that sentiment as an accomplished photographer. And of course, society embraced the camera as a creative tool, and photography blossomed as an art form that deepened rather than diminished the field of human creativity. There is no reason to believe that generative AI is any different. Like the camera or the many creative tools adopted since, generative AI will be an engine of human creativity, not a replacement for it. So with that context in mind, I want to make 2 points today. First, copyright's well-established fair use doctrine is the best way to balance the competing interests in the AI space. For the reasons I explain in detail in my written testimony, the training of AI models will generally fall within the established bounds of fair use. While some AI models may very well exceed those bounds, our courts are well equipped to handle those situations. The concerns that some have raised that AI models can replicate artistic styles are completely understandable. But the solution does not lie in copyright law, which does not and has never granted monopolies over artistic or musical styles.
That's so true.
Some groups have proposed a collective licensing regime for AI training data. Such a regime would eliminate fair use in this area, replacing it with a rigid assumption that AI training is infringing. I believe that would be a mistake. But if Congress were nevertheless interested in setting up a collective licensing regime, it should be aware of some of the serious practical challenges it will face. I detail those challenges in my written testimony, but fundamentally they are rooted in the fact that successfully training an AI model requires using many billions of pieces of content. That's many orders of magnitude larger than the number of works covered by any similar scheme in the history of American law. In short, Congress has already adopted a copyright law that is technology neutral and flexible enough to balance the need for a dynamic domestic AI industry with the rights of creators. I look forward to answering your questions today.
The gentleman yields back early. Professor Burge.
Chairman Issa, Ranking Member Johnson, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the chance to testify on this important topic. My name is Chris Callison Birch. I'm a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, a visiting researcher at the Allen Institute for Artificial Intelligence, and the deputy chair of the Board of Advisors of the Johns Hopkins University Human Language Technology Center of Excellence. Generative AI had its breakthrough moment in November of last year with the release of OpenAI's ChatGPT. This brought my field of research into the public eye and generated a huge amount of enthusiasm. I had access to OpenAI's large language models about a year and a half before the public. Despite having worked in this field for over 20 years, I was shocked by its capabilities. My first encounter with it pitched me into a career existential crisis. The technology had seemingly solved many of the problems that I was researching. It could translate texts from Russian into English. It could write coherent summaries of long documents and then answer questions about them. I wondered whether there was any room left for academic research in light of the fact that these large language models require Google-sized data centers to train. So I asked myself, should I just drop out of computer science and become a poet? But of course, the next week, I downloaded 15,000 poems from the internet and trained the system to write much better poetry than I ever could. I've subsequently calmed down, and I do not think that my job is at imminent risk of being replaced by ChatGPT, but I understand that many other people are experiencing the same sense of panic that I had. Artists and writers are worried about their work being devalued. I worry that careers like a paralegal might go the way of a lamplighter. I think that at its core, what we're talking about today goes far beyond copyright. It's about the value of work. This is a truly transformative technology that will shape many aspects of our lives. I hope that it is for the better. I optimistically believe that AI will enable us to be more productive workers and to allow more people to realize their creative visions. In my testimony today, I hope to offer my expertise in the technical aspect of generative AI, and I promise to explain it in a way that doesn't require a PhD in computer science. Answers to any questions that you have about the potential for legislation impacting on innovation in this field, and advocacy for retaining fair use for the purposes of training generative AI systems. In my written testimony, I provided an overview of how these systems work. I'm happy to explain during the hearing today how they do, or to have one-on-one meetings with you or your staff at a later date. To briefly summarize the points that I want to highlight from my written testimony, generative AI is trained on huge amounts of data. Large language models are now trained on roughly 1 trillion words. Image generators are trained on hundreds of millions of images. Much, or even most, of that data consists of copyrighted works that have been gathered by automatically crawling the web. It's important to remember that from these copyrighted works, AI systems learn. This learning process is called pre-training, which is the P in GPT. Pre-training AI systems is different than how we teach our children to learn, but the effect is similar. AI systems learn how to use language. They learn facts about the world. They learn ideas and opinions. They learn visual concepts. They even learn some rudimentary common sense reasoning skills. This pre-training happens on copyrighted data, which is then set aside as models are fine-tuned to perform more specific tasks. For instance, a large language model can be fine-tuned on a much smaller, purpose-built set of data in order to become an intelligent tutor, or a computer vision system can be fine-tuned in order to detect cancerous growths in mammograms. These systems could not be as easily adapted to these specialized tasks without the general knowledge that they acquire from the copyrighted data that they're pre-trained on. I believe, like Cy, that pre-training these systems squarely falls within fair use, and that internet era court precedents likely establish that this is the case, although, as the ranking member mentioned, this is currently being litigated in the courts. I do believe that the output of generative AI systems can infringe on copyright, and it's worth Congress considering legislation to better shape copyright to govern things like copyrightable characters, and possibly to extend copyright to cover things like right of publicity. I look forward to discussing this topic with you today.
Thank you. Mr. Irwin.
I think his testimony has a lot of good information too. I feel like I like how these descriptions are going, because the other thing that they keep always harping on is I can say at least both folks that have the software backgrounds, like that build the technology, are like, this is a tool, this is a tool, this is a tool, this is a tool. But I also like how he added in that layer of like, you know, actually explaining how the systems work. And you know, that's the main thing, is like breaking down what all of this really means to people who don't do it on a regular basis. And I do like that in the opening, the first opening, or like I think the chair's opening remarks were like saying we don't want to under react or overreact. But that's what it seems like across the board, even though this one is like only a half an hour in.
Chairman Issa, Ranking Member Johnson, distinguished members of this subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the important issues involving artificial intelligence and the impact on the creative industries. My name is Ashley Irwin, and I am currently serving my 6th term as President of the Society of Composers and Lyricists. I'm here today to advocate for my members who are already feeling the negative impact of generative artificial intelligence on their craft and its potential threat to their profession. First, some background on me and on the SCL. In my 40-plus years as a composer, arranger, and such, I have written music for over 1,000 hours of film and television and more than 3,000 commercials. Since 1990, I've provided musical compositions and arrangements for 23 Academy Award shows and been part of several Emmy-winning teams. I've had the pleasure of collaborating on many films with Oscar winners such as Clint Eastwood and Bill Conti. Over the years, my arrangements have been performed on numerous occasions for Presidents Clinton, Bush, Obama, and one of my choral orchestrations was performed during President Ronald Reagan's state funeral service. The SCL background. The Society of Composers and Lyricists is the premier organization for music creators working in all forms of visual media. With chapters in Los Angeles, New York, and Nashville, the SCL operates as the primary voice for over 3,000 members who work as creators of scores and songs for film, television, video games, and theatre. While the SCL advocates for our members on several different fronts, the issue that has consumed the majority of our time recently has been generative AI. The rapid introduction of generative AI systems is seen as an existential threat to the livelihood and continuance of our creative professions unless immediate steps are taken on legal, interpretive, and economic fronts to address these emerging issues. I want to be very clear. My goal is in raising these issues pertaining to the rights of writers and creators is not to block AI research and usage. We're simply advocating for the creation of a policy framework that ensures generative AI is developed and utilized responsibly, ethically, and with respect for human creators and copyright, so that the creative arts that are the real engine of generative AI can continue to flourish.
The creative arts are the real engine.
And their generative models should adhere to the fundamental 3 C's: consent, credit, and compensation. Consent by creators for the first use of their works in generative AI media. Credit, wherever audiovisual creators' works are used. And compensation at fair market rates for the ingestion of any portion of human creators' copyrighted works by AI generative machines and the subsequent output of new derivative works. I'd like to highlight 3 challenges posed to music creators by generative
Derivative works is like
potential solutions to which I've offered in my
a,
written testimony.
a gray area, right?
Issue 1. Generative AI has been equipped using copyright-protected human-authored works and programmed to mimic those works without consent, compensation, or credit. Issue 2. Copyright information, metadata, has been removed during the ingestion process of these models. Issue 3. The market will be diluted due to AI-generated works. As a result, copyright protection should not be granted to AI-generated works. In closing, I thought I should address why America's success is important to me. As you can no doubt tell by my accent, I'm not originally from the United States. I came here from Australia as a young man because I wanted to be a part of the vibrant culture that is the US entertainment industry. However, the rise of generative AI poses a threat to this unique American art form. If we do not protect and nurture our human creators, we risk losing one of our greatest exports and its profound influence. It's essential to prioritize policies and regulations that safeguard the intellectual property and copyright of creators and preserve the diverse and dynamic US cultural landscape. The protection of creators is not now nor has ever been in conflict with technological development. Our founding fathers recognized that. The only place the term right is mentioned in the Constitution is with regard to intellectual property. Specifically, the rights granted to authors and inventors in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8 are to promote the progress of science and useful arts. Respect for copyright and development of AI should go hand in hand. That way, all of humanity can benefit. I believe this committee has the power, authority, and motivation to lead that charge, and I look forward to working with every one of you to achieve that common goal.
Thank you. Mr. Navarro.
Good morning, Chairman Issa, Ranking Member Johnson, and esteemed members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. My name is Dan Navarro, and I've been a songwriter, recording artist, session singer, voice actor, and music activist for over 4 decades. Throughout my career, I've frequently been asked, how did you come up with that song? And while I often feel like saying it just came to me, the truth is all my work reflects a lifetime of personal emotions, rich experiences, and even shattered dreams. In other words, it's complicated. Sometimes it's a moment. The song that saved and sustained my career, We Belong, recorded by Pat Benatar 40 years ago, came to me right as I was giving up a career in music, and a long-time collaboration with my best friend was decaying. We decided to give it one more shot, and I started with the end of the song, and soon we were trading lyrics back and forth. It worked for us in one way or another. 2 estranged friends found a space to connect, and a song that people have enjoyed for the last 40 years was born in 90 minutes. That human alchemy can't be fully explained, but it's the heart of music creation. For generative AI...
Okay, before we go any further, this is the question I have. What happens when... This is very hypothetical, but what happens when society decides that they would prefer AI-generated, quote-unquote, creative works? Like, no, like when people start making the conscious effort to be like, I'm not going to listen to new artists on Spotify. I'm going to listen to, like, AI materials. How, you know, I don't know. I'm just like, cause I hear where, you know, the creative side is coming from. It's just, it's a lot more layers to it than just being like, I don't know. I don't want to, it'll be terrible to set some type of precedence that like, yeah, AI art is not art. And it's like, but most artists are usually the main ones to be like, how you gonna tell me what art is? And again, like AI isn't just, I don't know, this is still people. It's still people doing stuff, right? It's still people at the end of the day. I don't know. We'll see. But I feel like there's already, like it's easy to say, oh, people don't realize or recognize or acknowledge that, you know, people's copyrighted works is being used in training. But like I said, like what happens down the line when it's like, yeah, you can get royalties, but people, I mean, it's people like what they like, you know. You can't decide on that part. So I don't know.
AI, the answer to the question, where did that come from, is in many ways much simpler. These machines have no emotions or experiences or dreams of their own to draw from. All they have are millions and millions of imported songs and lyrics, most copyrighted, hoovered off the internet without permission. Training AI to mimic professional performers or generate new works based on millions of copies of published songs and recordings presents a host of legal implications, from copyright infringements to violations of rights of publicity and trademark to name, voice, and likeness abuses. And it's a long-term threat to music itself. By marginalizing and ultimately abandoning the fundamental human spark in music creation, we're inviting a future that sees fakes as real and that debases our art and culture with soulless brown food product, mediocrity. Does anyone think a computer-generated song can give you goosebumps or comfort? Abandoning or become a theme song to the loves of our lives? That's our song. How can AI give a goosebump if it can't get a goosebump? That's human. To fight for human creativity, I was proud to help launch the Human Artistry Campaign in March, and I'm here today as a supporter of that initiative. Now boasting more than 100 organizations globally, representing all kinds of arts and creativity, it is the global center of gravity advocating for the rights of creators in the age of AI. This coalition believes AI is exciting and promising, but can never replace human artistry and soul. It's based on 7 core principles that I support wholeheartedly. First, technology has long empowered human expression, and AI will be no different. Musicians will use this technology to do great things. Second, human-created works will remain essential in our lives. At the heart of the connection between the artist and the audience are shared, lived experiences only humans can relate to and convey. Third, the use of copyrighted works for AI purposes and the use of voices and likenesses of professional performers requires permission. Like all predecessor technologies, AI must be subject to authorization and free market licensing from all rights holders and creators. Fourth, governments should not create new copyright or other IP exemptions that allow AI developers to exploit creators without permission and compensation. People looking to make a fast buck from technological change routinely ask policymakers to pick winners and losers. Here, that would be devastating. Fifth, copyright.
Wait, you don't want to be exploited, or you don't want to be exploited without permission? Am I? Hold on, hold on. I just need to. Okay. So maybe the generic definition and not like the other descriptions that we tend to go to. Okay, sorry. That I just had to do that real quick.
Copyright should only protect the unique value of human intellectual creativity. The copyright clause of the Constitution exists to incentivize humans to create. Machines don't need incentives. Sixth,
Not true.
trustworthiness and transparency are essential to the success of AI and the protection of creators. Without transparent AI, we will have no idea whether the inputs AI systems were trained on were licensed, leaving us no way to enforce our rights. Seventh, creators must have a seat at the table, not just developers. Our creativity, our rights, our livelihoods are at stake. If AI is allowed to take away the ability of authors and artists to control and make a living from their art, we will lose all authenticity in our expression. We'll lose culture itself. The next decision by the courts and Congress in this area will decide our cultural future, and it's your responsibility to make sure the cultural promise of reward for human genius remains viable. Guided by the principles of the Human Artistry Campaign, we can look forward to the real emotions, experiences, and dreams of future generations of creators, perhaps facilitated by AI, but never silenced by it. I thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Sedlik. Chairman Issa, Ranking Member Johnson, distinguished members, thank you for the opportunity to testify here today. I've been a professional photographer and filmmaker for 37 years. I'm a professor at the Art Center College of Design, the former president of the American Photographic Artists, and the current president of the PLUS Coalition. As mentioned by Chairman Issa, PLUS is a global nonprofit organization focused exclusively on simplifying the identification of visual works. PLUS is currently developing a global nonprofit visual registry and in cooperation with the IPTC, updating our widely adopted metadata standards to allow artists to declare AI-related permissions and prohibitions in their image files. You can learn more about that at plus.org. As a professional visual artist, I make my living by creating and, most importantly, licensing my works. My ability to create new works, sustain my business, support my family, depends directly on my exclusive rights to reproduce, distribute, publicly display, and adapt my original works. These fundamental rights are the core of my business, providing a strong incentive to create new works. In fact, they're the only way that I can afford to create new works. Unfortunately, many AI developers and platforms have built their businesses by exploiting billions of visual works without authorization from or compensation to copyright owners. The theft and exploitation of visual works by AI platforms displaces a common, long-standing practice in which creators and their agents offer and sell artist reference licenses, permitting the use of works for reference and creating new derivative works. AI ingestion falls squarely within this reference license category. In fact, stock photo agencies routinely sell reference licenses to AI platforms, permitting the use of visual works for AI ingestion. A market clearly exists for these licenses. The unlicensed ingestion of photographs by AI systems usurps that market and forces human creators to compete with machine-made derivatives of their own original works. Many AI platforms are trained on copies of creative works scraped from websites that display those works without the knowledge or permission of the copyright owners. I've found thousands of unlicensed copies of my works in open databases used by AI systems to support image ingestion and generation. It is clear that many generative AI platforms were founded on copyright infringement.
It is clear that y'all don't watermark not a damn thing. I feel like maybe I could be making that up, but like there's this layer of how things are going with AI right now, especially on the data side, where it's like we just spent like 2 decades putting everything that we own and like all our personal information on the internet, and now it's like, yes, some of that stuff is probably like should have been off limits, but a lot of it is like people just be posting their stuff everywhere. Just, you know, it already gets exploited. So, you know, AI is just replicating what we already have. So it's like it's underlying issues that have to get solved, I feel like. But hopefully that'll be a part of the conversation from like the technical side, I think.
In defense of their actions, AI developers attempt to apply blanket claims of fair use, counter to the spirit and letter of the Copyright Act. Fair use is not a right. It's an affirmative defense requiring a fact-specific inquiry on a case-by-case basis. AI developers claim that AI-generated works are not substantially similar to source works and thus can't be infringements. But this ignores the fact that the exclusive reproduction right is a standalone right under Section 106 of the Copyright Act. The creation and use of copies for AI ingestion purposes is copyright infringement on a massive scale. AI developers further suggest that photographers' use of cameras is the creative equivalent of drafting prompts for generative AI. They minimize the creative process in photography and attempt to frame photographers as mere button pushers. This is a false equivalency. We photographers are visual storytellers. Our creative decisions are guided by our life history and our unique combination of training, experience, personality, aesthetic sensibilities, dreams, memories, search, and other factors. When creating our works, we anticipate and respond dynamically to the subject matter and shooting environment.
We exercise control over the visual rendition of the scene. We decide which elements to include and exclude and where to place those elements within the frame. We determine how to juxtapose people, objects, and other compositional elements for a desired creative effect. We control the placement and interplay of color, tone, texture, contrast, light, and shade. We control the perspective, distortion, depth of field, and selective focus to guide the viewer's eye through the image. And we select the precise moment at which to create the ultimate photograph. This substantial creative human expression is not the equivalent of submitting a text prompt instructing a machine to generate a work. Copyright law affords protection only to human expression. The output of an image by machines in response to prompts is and should remain ineligible for copyright protection. Policies must not favor machines over human creators. AI developers must be required not only to obtain advance permission to ingest and exploit creative works, but to compensate creators, whether directly or through collective licensing organizations such as the American Society for Collective Rights Licensing. AI technologies must be developed and used in a manner that is responsible, respectful, and ethical, upholding the underlying goals and purposes of our copyright system. I appreciate the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to answering your questions.
That's the last.
Thank you, and I thank all our witnesses.
That's the last witness.
I'm going to forego my questioning until the end or near the end. And so I'm going to go to Mr. Fitzgerald, somebody who understands what it is to own copyright in his former life. Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Damley, Supreme Court has held since 1884 case Burrough-Giles Lithographic Company versus Cerrone that photographs can be entitled to copyright protection where the photographer makes decisions regarding creative elements of the work. You were quoted in your testimony as saying society embraced the camera as a creative tool and photography blossomed as an art form that deepened rather than diminished this whole field of creativity. There's no reason to believe AI is any different, I think was your point. The Copyright Office has disputed this comparison, instead comparing the generative AI to a client who hires an artist to create something because users do not exercise ultimate creative control. What's kind of your response or your thoughts to copyright comparison? And do you believe that copyright was correct in denying copyright for lack of the ultimate creative control as they did in their decision in Zarya of the Dawn?
Congressman, thank you for that question. So the way I would start by framing this issue is the point I was trying to make in my testimony is that generative AI can be a tool that humans use to enhance their creative output. And so what the Copyright Office has said is where that tool is doing all of the work of creative output, then that's a situation where we don't need the economic incentive that the Constitution has as an incentive for creating that output. But I think that's sort of one end of the spectrum of the question. There's going to be a big gray area where there's going to be basically human and AI together creating output. I think that's going to be a very common situation going forward. And I think in that situation, I would say, where the human is exercising some control over the AI and its output, where there's a sort of iterative process between what the generative AI produces and what the human produces, then that is a situation where you should have copyrightable output, that the output of that process should be copyrightable to some degree. And it's no different, I think, than a camera, than a photographer's interaction with a camera. They're adjusting the settings on the camera. They're choosing the framing of the image. They're employing a lot of choice. Yes, the camera is the one that's actually recording the image, but the human has control over that process. And so by the same token, where a human has that level of control over the generative AI process, as I think will happen in many cases, then the output of that should be copyrightable in the same way that a photograph is copyrightable.
Reiterate that. Do you think copyright got this correct in the way that they had came up with their determination?
I think in the particular instance and the particular things that they said, I think they got it right. But they're addressing a very just sort of extreme example where the human is not actually providing anything other than a simple prompt to the generative AI system. And then they've decided in that instance, the output is not copyrightable. I think that's going to be very different than the mine run of cases using generative AI. The mine run of cases are going to involve much more involvement of human authorship than just providing a simple,
Right.
one-sentence prompt.
You be
Yeah, so,
done written like 100
'cause I
prompts
have
just
1
to
minute
get
left,
something the way you
actually.
want it.
So what other situations do you think could emerge that copyright would then have to deal with where you do find this mix of artistry along with what AI has capabilities of doing that could somehow, put us in a place where it can be undetermined who actually is the creator?
So I think those are going to have to be determined on a case-by-case basis. And the office actually, in its guidance, provided some examples.
Right, like it's not like you can just automatically get copyrights and patents and stuff. Like it's a whole process.
For instance, where
It's literally a
provide
case-by-case
prompt that generates
process.
an image, and then you adjust that image. The human actually takes that image as a starting point and then adds more creative authorship to that image. That's one example. I think another example that you might see is where you start with an image that you have, I'm using image ones as an example, but you start with an image, you feed it into the generative AI, and then generative AI helps you make changes to that image in certain ways, in the same way that you might use Photoshop. I think in those circumstances, you're going to have situations where the output is copyrightable, and then there may be questions about how much of it is copyrightable, how much of it was generated by the AI, but those can be dealt with on a fact-by-fact basis.
Thank you very much, and I would yield back.
I thank the gentleman. We now recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Johnson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The other day I was in my car cruising, and there was an interview with Smokey Robinson on the radio. And Smokey Robinson was saying that his big hit, Cruisin', took in total about 5 years to come to the final product. I'd like to ask you, Mr. Irwin, Mr. Navarro, and Mr. Sedlick, your works can be scraped from the internet in a matter of seconds for AI ingestion. Can you explain what goes into creating a single work of art and how long that process might take, starting with you, Mr. Irwin?
Sure.
It depends.
How long is a piece of string, to be honest? It's always different. When we're working in an audiovisual space, be it film or television or something like that, where you're commissioned to work, you have deadlines and you have to come up with the goods by a certain time, and deliver them. When you're working as a songwriter, more like Dan does, you have a little more freedom, and you can work on a lyric, you can work on a song, you can collaborate, you can have a half-written song and then bring someone else in. But
You can have a
everything
half-written
takes time.
song and
Nothing
then
is
bring
push
somebody
button.
else
There is no
in.
push-button music up to this point that's any good anyway. I mean, most of it's just, not usable.
Mr. Navarro, thank you.
I'd like to affirm what Mr. Irwin says. I made reference to my big hit song that took 90 minutes to write. The emotions that led to my contributions and the contributions of my late partner took 3 years to percolate, to run through my emotions in my system, be expressed, be wept, be verbalized, be internalized, before they came out in an evening blast when everything was ready. It didn't take 90 minutes, it took several years. I've had songs take 7 years, I've had songs take 7 days. It varies depending on what it takes to sit and look at something and go, it's done. Now it's done.
Thank you. Mr. Sedlick.
Thank you. There are many genres of photographers, each of whom works in a different way, including within those genres. Personally, I'm very controlling in my photography. Every aspect of every photograph that I take is something that is planned and controlled, whereas another photographer might be more spontaneous. In my process, I use free association first. It will take
weeks, months, even more than a year. I use free association, come up with ideas, make thumbnail sketches, make iterative sketches, do tests, do planning, set the whole thing up, test, and then during the process, I control it. Whereas a photojournalist might make all of those decisions in an instant. It's their lifetime of experience and all their capabilities that lets them accomplish the same thing, thousands of decisions in a second.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Sedlick. Can you compare the process of creating works, your works, or can you compare that to works created through generative AI?
Do y'all have experience with the technology? That's what I want to know.
The same goes for AI. There's the full spectrum.
And if you could tell me also how it feels as an artist to have your work used without your permission to serve as the basis for a product that might then compete.
He shouldn't do that. That's like a little leading right there, man.
Yes.
If you could leave some time for Mr. Navarro and Mr. Irwin to respond to that question also. 58 seconds. Go ahead.
58 seconds, right. Nah. He already saw he wasn't going the direction he wanted him to go in. Then he just changed
Photographers
it.
are used to the advancement of technology. We've been using technology for 179 years, and we're usually first in using it. So we anticipate that technology is going to continue to develop, that new opportunities for creation are going to advance, that it's going to be easier to create great works, and we accept that. That's not our concern here. Our concern is that our works are being used without our permission and without any compensation.
Right. That should be the only concern.
Thank you. Let me go to Mr. Navarro. Appreciate it.
I feel the same way. I think AI is a tool that I myself could use. My partner in my duo
Could use, but literally haven't tried.
Impersonate his voice and put out a brand new Lowe and Navarro record. But permission, credit, compensation.
Thank you. Mr. Irwin?
We've been using elements of AI as tools I've certainly been using them for almost 30 years, but always with the control of what the output is. Quite often create the initial piece of music that you're going to work with, then you process it in a particular way, and you make the decisions of what is the final product going to be. Some of the options you were given are not usable. You know, it's a matter of taste, and only humans have that kind of discerning taste.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the indulgence. And Mr. Carlson Birch, if I had time, I'd be asking you about the value of work that you see as so critical for us to think about. But thank you.
I thank the gentleman, and we will make sure we get that answer. The gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Benz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank all of you for being here today. So my question is, I'm not sure which one of you to ask, but the issue is whether our technology is such that we can actually do what I think many of you want us to do. And I'm just thinking of the Led Zeppelin situation that took years to sort out whether or not, quote, the descending chord sequence had been used for centuries and whether or not it had been stolen. And of course, it ultimately was decided after 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years of litigation that Led Zeppelin had, for various reasons, not usurped it. My question to you is, and I'm going to ask it of you, Mr. Navarro, if you think that we have the technology available to sort these things out after the fact, and if not, what would you be suggesting that we do to try to prevent it before it happens? I just want to know, given the nature of music, and I'm a very bad musician, but I know what a guitar is, how in the world do you sort this out? Do we have the technology available?
I'm not sure we're qualified to determine.
He should
how it's
ask
sorted
that
out. I know
probably
that I,
to
as
the
creator,
actual.
If I get too close to something, I pull back. If I get a little too close to Ray Charles, I pull back. If I get too close to John Lennon, I pull back. And if I don't do it right, there are legal remedies. Just ask George Harrison or Robin Thicke.
Mr. Damley, I'm not sure I pronounced your name correctly, but could you address the question?
Thank you, Congressman. You got it exactly right. So I would point to the sort of cases that you're talking about, like the Led Zeppelin case, like the Blurred Lines case, as examples of instances where copyright did not stay within its proper bounds, where courts decided that borrowing somebody's musical style counted as copyright infringement. And I think
Right.
when those decisions came down, it really threw the music industry into chaos. I'm a music lawyer in addition to being a technology lawyer. I know that the music industry really grappled with those decisions, and you had artists saying that they were afraid to create because they were worried that they were inadvertently, perhaps, borrowing the style from somebody else. And it got to the point that even the rights owner groups started criticizing those decisions, saying they went too far. They did not allow artists to express themselves as freely as they should be able to. And I think, thankfully, we've seen a return back to those core principles of the Copyright Act, which is ideas, styles should be able to be used by all. So that's what we've seen in these recent decisions involving Ed Sheeran, a return back to that principle of being faithful to the Copyright Act, faithful to the Constitution's mandate for what the Copyright Act is supposed to do. And so that would be my response to that issue.
And thank you for your answers. And with that, Mr. Chair, I yield the rest of my time to you.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I'll continue along somewhat an earlier line. Mr. Navarro, we talked about credit, we talked about permission, and we talked about compensation, or you did. Credit would seem to be one that Congress could mandate, that the database input could be searchable so you would know that your work or your name or something was in the database. Fairly easy, probably doable. It's quite an index of billions or trillions in
Right.
some cases, but that would be. The output might be a little more complex, and we'll talk about that later. The compensation is a question I want you to opine on, and maybe both ends of the question. If there are 10 billion or 10 trillion inputs, and let's just assume for a moment that there are a billion copyrighted, we all know what it's like to get that big check from Spotify for the 100 or 1,000 times you were played, and it comes out in pennies. Okay, what is the division of a billion pieces of music, and how would it, in fact, assuming that that was part of the output, how would you actually quantify it? Because we have to put a number on it at some point.
It's a difficult thing to do. I believe in free market negotiations with regard to this. I know that can be cumbersome. I don't believe in compulsory licenses, especially as regards this particular issue. The compulsory licenses I'm used to, whether it's at Sirius XM or in the use of a song that I've already recorded, which is a compulsory license for someone else to use, benefits me directly. When my stuff is part of a large number of stuff that's scraped, it supersedes my work. It doesn't even just compete with it. That's a foot race. It supersedes it. And in that context, I believe in free market.
And we will undoubtedly be asking that question of others in another forum. With that, we go to the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Nadler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Irwin, according to reports, OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT, is valued at $29 billion. And Stability AI, the company behind Stable Diffusion, was valued at around $1 billion late last year. By way of comparison, can you give us an idea of how much the average composer's salary would be?
It's very difficult to say because the way first of all, we're not governed by any kind of collective bargaining. We're not a union or anything like that, so we're very much independent contractors. It's easier to talk about ranges for television shows, an hour of television, a feature film. Those sort of budgets are easier to quantify, and then of course it comes into the experience of whether you're an entry-level person or a very experienced high-level person. All of those change the rates. And then of course on the back end, where we get our royalty streams, which is where a lot of us make our money, the performing royalties that are collected by the societies like ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC, they are dependent completely on the number of performances of those works that include your music. And that's the same for audiovisual and for streaming and everything. So it's very hard to say. Some years it's almost like a farmer. Some years you have a bumper crop. Next year you mightn't see much at all.
I see. And Mr. Sedlick, what about the average photographer? Same. What about the average photographer? The average salary. Use your mic.
I don't have statistics on that, Representative Nadler. However, many photographers make as little as $20,000 to $40,000 a year, and amounts greater than that outside of certain spaces can be unusual.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Irwin, can you talk a little more about what threats generative AI poses to composers and songwriters? What actions do you think we should take to ensure that your work in artistry is protected? Actually, you've talked about the threats. Can you talk?
I can talk. Do you want to talk about the threat, or do you want to talk about the solution?
I think you've talked about the threats.
Yeah, some of what's in my written testimony. One of the things that the music industry has done particularly well in this area is collective licensing. And they have, as I just mentioned, for ASCAP, BMI, CSAC, they have a way to monitor performances for mechanical royalties, which are the physical royalties, that you have sound exchange, and then there are streaming royalties as well through the Music Licensing Collective. And there are reciprocal organizations set up all over the world. So,
how would we apply that to open it?
Well, I think music is probably more easily applied to music than it possibly is to some of these other art forms, because every piece of music that's registered has a registration number, a work number, a recording number. Every artist has their own number. I have what's called an IPI number. Dan has one. So they're already in the system. You don't need to reinvent them. You just need to make sure that they are attributed to those works as they're being used or logged, or however you want to.
How do you determine what works are used in generative AI?
Well, that's I think something that will need to be determined. I mean, I write music. I'm not a technologist.
Maybe Professor Callison-Birch. Transparency in AI training models is a concern, but transparency to the end user that the media they are viewing was AI created is critical as well. I see that in your testimony you note that parts of it were composed using ChatGPT. Should some sort of disclosure like that be required? And currently, how are individuals alerted to the fact that they're hearing or viewing an AI-created work, if at all?
Thank you for the question. So disclosure of AI-generated works, I think, is valuable. I think especially with their potential for societal harms through generating deep fakes or works that could be used to influence elections by mocking up instances like Trump being arrested in New York. I saw it being generated by Midjourney. Certainly disclosure.
Generating a fake speech by me.
I think that this is an important issue that touches on the output of generative AI systems, and that is where I think that regulation is deserved.
And how are individuals alerted to the fact that they're hearing or viewing an AI-created work, if at all?
I'm sorry, repeat the question, please.
How are individuals alerted to the fact that they are hearing or viewing an AI-created work, if at all?
There's a variety of technological devices that our field is innovating in order to mark AI-generated works, similar to a watermark on a stock photography site. This is not an established industry-wide practice, but it is something that our field has been discussing. At the moment, it's up to the user of the AI system who's generating it to disclose to people who they're transmitting that image to that it was generated.
Thank you. My time is well expired, and I thank the chairman for his indulgence.
Mr. Chairman, you gave me the similar indulgence when you sat in this chair, so I'm only returning the favor. I thank you. We now go to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to follow up on that line of questioning about existing technologies that are there to identify digital works, enhance copyright protection. Mr. Sedlick, digital watermarks, tags, metadata, what challenges are you aware of in the use of these types of technologies for works that are used in training AI?
We have mature, very capable technologies to identify visual works, including image recognition and what's called steganography, which is bearing signals in the image to identify it. Creators use embedded metadata to pass information into their images so that as their images are distributed, their images can be identified. A big problem for us is that all of that information is stripped out by the social media platforms and other platforms when images are used. We would very much benefit from a change and improvement to the law to make it illegal to remove embedded rights metadata, even if it's not done for the purpose of infringement. Right now, under Section 1202, it's only illegal if it's done intentionally for the purpose of inducing, enabling, concealing, or facilitating infringement.
Mr. Irwin, what about music?
Sorry?
Do you have any comments on that?
Yes, there is watermarking and fingerprinting used in music technology over and above the identifiers that I talked about. There's technology that currently allows music to be identified even within a program that has dialogue and sound effects over the top of it. It can still identify that music. So, the technology is there for this to be done. It's just a matter of having the will and sitting with the organizations who are doing it and getting.
But it's not going to be the
I
exact
have no doubt
same
that
work.
there's a way
It's going to be a new
track this
work.
stuff correctly.
Professor, you commented on that and talked about the trending toward use of this technology by industry. Is that something that's happening too slowly? Is there something that needs involvement from government? What do you think?
So I think at the core, the problem with an idea like a compulsory license and Mr. Isa's suggestion of what is the value of 1 over a trillion when you think about the volume of this work, and I can say that definitively that the value of 1 over a trillion is going to be vanishingly small. And so I think another key that is a practical consideration here is unlike compulsory licenses, which are based on performance, so the MMA, where Spotify plays music, Taylor Swift gets more money than some random person in the catalog because her songs are played more. There's no equivalent here for generative AI. It's impossible to understand how much of a system's output is due to Stephen King versus a random Reddit poster who's written a paragraph in the collection. So I think the lack of that performance is key to one of the tricky things about establishing a compulsory license here.
Mr. Irwin, some have suggested that imposing IP-related obligations on AI developers would hobble development because of the inability to feasibly use copyrighted content for training purposes. Would you be willing to license your works for training purposes, and do you think other creators would also be willing?
If I was being compensated for them, absolutely.
Yeah, but how much you expecting to get?
I don't have a problem with the technology at all. I have a problem with the sealing of the material.
And Mr. Navarro, you indicated your willingness to use AI.
A similar answer. The ability to approve or disapprove of a particular use is why I oppose compulsory licenses. I don't oppose blanket licenses, which might streamline a process. But I still have the ability to say yes or no and opt out.
Now, in your testimony, you advocated against granting AI any special IP exemptions, depending on how some lawsuits turn out.
And then what if?
AI doesn't
Okay,
grant
hold
special
on.
exemptions in
Hold on.
training AI.
So, when this is my other question. So, if an artist uses AI to generate something, even if it's generated from their own material, wouldn't they want credit for that? So, yeah, you gotta make both of those sides work too, because it's like you can't say, oh well, just because this person is not a songwriter, that anything that they generate is not quote unquote in a work of art. But just because I'm a songwriter, if I use the technology, then of course I should get like some copyright. You can't have it both ways. So I want to see how that kind of idea plays out too.
With copyrighted music is not infringement under current law. In that event, would you advocate for changing the law to make training AI with copyrighted works a type of infringement?
I'm not sure that I am qualified to answer that. It's a very technical question. I do believe that as we're looking at guardrails, guardrails used to be made of wood. Then they started becoming made of steel. Now as cars get faster and more powerful, maybe they need to be made of titanium. As these technologies progress and as its scope increases, our guardrails need to be modified and improved.
Thank you. Yield back.
The guardrails of the future will be software driven. With that, we go to the gentleman from California, my colleague, Mr. Liu.
Thank you, Chairman Issa and Ranking Member Johnson, for holding this important hearing. As a recovering computer science major, I am enthralled with AI, and I believe it has and will continue to revolutionize society. It can also cause us harm, and it creates all sorts of unanswered questions. So I'd like to walk through some examples so that the American public and I can better understand how artificial intelligence interacts with copyright. And I'd like to ask Mr. Damel this example. Let's say I create a generative AI internet application related to music. I do it for commercial purposes. And to train it, I scrape the entire internet of all songs, including every one of Taylor Swift's copyrighted songs, without her permission. Your view is I wouldn't have to compensate her in any way. Is that right?
So I think it would very much depend on the particular way in which you train the AI models. Not all AI models are constructed the same way. Some are constructed in ways that might very well exceed the bounds of fair use. And so it's inevitably going to be a case-by-case determination of whether a particular model is going to exceed those bounds or not.
Let's just use ChatGPT's model.
So
exceed?
in an instance where what you've done is extract unprotectable facts from any copyrighted work, so stepping aside and generalizing this point to any kind of work.
Am I good at math?
What you've done is
Hypothetically.
extract unprotectable facts
but
from those works, and then use those facts to generate a new work.
I mean, math is my favorite
Then,
subject.
Under well-established
I'll say that.
principles of copyright law, that is not infringement.
I'm not even about generating.
I mean, it's
I'm about
fine if you're
training
not good at math, though.
Just
Not
on
sure.
the training side, if that's all that happens.
Are you trying to do
then-
something that's math
then
related?
Under a long line of cases.
Also, I failed math classes
testimony,
before. That doesn't
that
mean
is
I'm not
fair
good at
use.
math. I
But
failed
to train a
geometry
model,
before. I
you
failed a
actually
lot of math
download
classes in college.
the Taylor Swift songs.
I
That's
failed
correct. That's correct.
theoretical
You view that as fair use.
calculus.
That would be fair use. The premise of any fair use case is going to be
So internet applications like YouTube pay a licensing fee to Taylor Swift when they download her songs. What is the difference?
Well, the difference would be
I've taken linear
and
and Diffie Q.
Taking the work and then they're taking that
Calc
work
1, 2,
and they're
and 3.
streaming it to end users. So that's a public performance of her work.
So let's say ChatGPT lets you just put out Taylor Swift lyrics. What's the difference?
Yeah, I think that would be that might be an issue that exceeds the bounds of fair use, where you're
Now let's say I take my model and I generate a new song similar to a Taylor Swift song in terms of lyrics. Is that a copyright infringement?
That's correct, Congressman.
It would be infringement.
It would not be infringement.
It would not be infringement.
Because one of the basic principles of the Copyright Act, which I discussed earlier, is replicating somebody's style, writing a song. If I were to write a song,
Yeah,
in
you
the
can't.
style
You
of
don't
Taylor
have a
Swift,
style.
I would not be committing copyright infringement. That's one of the.
You don't have a
basic principles
style.
of
Now,
copyright law.
now, as you know, voice cannot be copyrighted, but let's say my model also generates voice very similar to Taylor Swift, and I have this brand new song similar to Taylor Swift's voice, similar to her lyrics. You believe that that would not be copyright infringement?
I think you would have to
Proofs are
look at other
hard.
bodies of law to determine whether that would be illegal. I think as a matter of copyright law and just the basic principles of copyright law, that would not be copyright infringement. Which is not to say it's not concerning for other reasons, but in looking at the copyright
When we talk
law
about
itself,
copyright, that's not
it's not.
copyright.
And then following that, in fact, you believe I could then copyright this Taylor Swift like song with voice like Taylor Swift that I generated by scraping the internet with Taylor Swift copyrighted songs that I didn't pay her for, right?
I don't know that that would necessarily be the case, and certainly, as we were discussing earlier, the Copyright Office has taken the view that AI-generated works like that may not be subject to copyright protection at all.
Okay, thank you. So my remaining time, I have a question for Professor Callison-Birch about disclosure, and Representative Natalie asked about this. Many creators already use AI, right, in their creative works. I mean, there's a whole bunch of algorithms that make your song sound better. They don't disclose that. Like, how would you even define what kinds of AI they need to disclose that help them with their particular creative work?
That's a great question. If you'll indulge me, I want to answer your question to Sai as well. So that your question about if I download Taylor Swift's songs and I learn from it could be equally well posed to a teenage pop star who's learning how to sing. So if that person learned from Taylor Swift, the decision of whether or not they're violating copyright is not at the time when they're listening to the songs and learning to perform music. It's when they release an album and whether that album is sufficiently similar to Taylor Swift's songs. So
Same shit.
Instead of Taylor's
it's not that complicated.
version, we release ChatGPT's version of an album. That's infringement, but the learning from it is not. In terms of the disclosure of use of copyrighted of generative AI in materials, I think there's an interesting ill-advised guidance from the Copyright Office that works that involve substantive use of generative AI are not copyrightable at the moment. I believe that AI is going to be used in a collaborative way with humans, and the human using it deserves that copyright. Whether or not they acknowledge it, I think, depends on the use of it. So there was a law passed that political ads must disclose if they're using generative AI to create images of politicians. That seems like a very valid case to disclose. If I'm creating a comic book, seems less high stakes, so probably not necessary.
Thank you. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. We now go to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gooden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and that was very interesting, and I'd like to maybe keep going along those lines. It seems as if, as this develops, we'd like to perhaps see more transparency in the process. Is it unrealistic to think that the songwriters, the people, the American people, whoever, could kind of see what goes into these sources of what has an influence on the AI? Mr. Callison-Birch, I'll give it to you, but I don't think the average person, myself included, understands the technology. But is it unrealistic to ask that we know if a particular song got more influence from Taylor Swift or whoever, and how that process comes about?
So I think this is a super interesting question that, again, involves the output of
abstract algebra and number theory. I mean, you passed. Hey, you passed.
I think that there is a valid case to be made that copyright should.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't want to. Yeah. Okay. Math is my favorite subject, but I do always try to like have the caveat that like it's not a requirement to be good at math to be like in software or even to actually work with AI. It just depends on how deep you want to go. If you actually have to care about, you know, the underlying mathematical concepts. Me being a person that wants to go into research, yes, I do. I will be dusting off my linear algebra and dusting off my matrix math and all that good stuff. But yeah. So when I first went to college, I was a math minor. I was a music major, and so I didn't really know what I was gonna do. So I was taking math classes, and I started out at calculus as a freshman. So I took Calc 1, 2, 3. I took linear algebra and I took differential equations, but I was a math minor. So then I took it's called numerical analysis. That's what it's called. And they changed it to another name, but numerical analysis. It's like depending on what kind of university you go to. For me, it was like we had 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, right? So 5,000 is like a senior level, like probably like, you know, the highest level of difficulty as far as a bachelor's degree. So it was like, okay, calc was good, linear was good, all, everything was good. And then when I took numerical methods or no, numerical analysis, I was just like, yeah, I don't care this much. Although in all fairness, I might change my mind about that at this point in my life, but because I'm about to go back to school, but numerical methods or numerical analysis was literally I failed that class. I think I I think I actually tried to take that class twice if I'm not mistaken. It just kind of occurred to me. I'm pretty sure I took that class twice and I still was just like, yeah, no. It's not even that I think I could have done better in the class. I did not care enough. Like I didn't care enough at that point to be like motivated to really study and internalize what was going on. I was just like, why do I have to prove that 2 is even? Like I don't care. So it's hard for me to say, but yeah, I mean, I have to say that and put that out there because I also teach a lot of people that transition into tech, and that's like, I did actually transition into tech from like learning online and taking a boot camp and stuff. So I never like to make it seem like, oh, math is like a requirement, because it just depends on what you want to do. So but yeah, I don't know where the math conversations are coming from. I assume the math conversations are coming up because we're talking about AI and ML. So yeah,
To protect against a case where I, as
just finished classes.
user of an AI system, ask it to generate something that mimics a particular artist. Like this concern that artists have, I think, is 100% valid. That you can currently say, generate a comic strip in the style of Sarah Anderson, and it produces something similar in style, but does not reproduce any of her published works. That, to me, seems more like a right of publicity style concern than current copyright law is addressing. I do think it's an ethical issue that we should consider as an industry, and I think that there should be an opt-out mechanism for artists to explicitly exclude their work from the vast amount of training data that we have. But again, I want to make this distinction clear. What AI systems are learning
Switch from business to math. I switched from music to mechanical engineering, but then I ended up just learning coding, and I've been a software engineer for a while now, but I'm going back to school this year because I want to get a PhD.
There will be more of a push to
At least a data analyst is like a decent type of, like if of all the degrees that you could have without knowing what you wanted to do, is the degree in data analyst, because that's not a bad degree to have.
Just as there are many ways
Dr. Oh man, I gotta put that. It's on my vision board, y'all. Can you see my vision board on this screen?
I think we're really at the very, very early stages of trying to figure out where you draw the line between an
I should put the title on there though.
Deserves copyright protection under sort of the constitutional precept of what copyright law is about, and what creative output that is assisted with an AI deserves copyright protection.
This is my vision board. It's on my screen, but
I agree with the Copyright Office.
Well, this is more so for masters, but that's the next, probably the next step.
Sufficient human input.
But this is on the Georgia Tech.
In order to warrant.
This is on the Georgia Tech website. That picture.
Almost a constitutional requirement. But exactly how that plays out in any given case is going to require, over time, over the next few years and more, looking at every case that comes and trying to decide, okay, is this on...
Got a math degree? Well, yeah, you got a base.
Okay, thank you.
I didn't know what to do as a pure math major, even at that time, besides being a math teacher, so I didn't even consider being a math major too long, which is why I ended up just defaulting to being a music major.
And they said, you should be able to fly a drone over anyone's house and park it and watch them all day. A helicopter can do that, so what's the difference? And I said, well, a helicopter is operated by an individual. It can't stay up there forever, and you know if it's there because it's loud and big. And so I thought of that as you were talking about your example of the middle school child who sings like Taylor Swift, compared to the AI that sounds like Taylor Swift, and how there's no difference. The difference is that's a middle school child, and I'm not real worried about a middle school child taking over the music industry. So I think we have to differentiate between the two.
Would the gentleman yield?
This gentleman?
Yeah, would you gentlemen yield for
Oh,
just a
of
second?
course, please.
Thank you. At some future time, I'd like you to talk, and particularly Mr. Navarro, about how you view the difference between a cover band and AI, and where the guidelines are similar and when they'd be different, and the same, obviously, from a legal standpoint.
People ask if you want to be a teacher. Heck yeah.
I'm out of time.
I literally, that's literally my
And I'll
life
go to the
story.
gentlelady from
People
North
were like, "Oh,
Carolina.
you're good at math. You should be a math teacher."
Thank you.
Oh my
Mr.
God, they just
Chairman,
blew
and
my
thank you
ears
to all the
out.
witnesses for being here today.
But yeah, people were like, "You're good at math. You should be a
Heard
math
multiple
teacher."
perspectives today
And then
on
I
whether
went
training
and
AI on unlicensed
I went to
copyrighted
see if that
material
was my
should be
life, and
permitted
it wasn't
through
for
the
me.
Fair use doctrine, and the Copyright Office considers several factors in evaluating this question of fair use. But one of those factors is the amount and how substantial
How much
the
longer we got?
copyrighted work was.
We
that
still
was
got an hour,
used.
y'all.
And the guidance notes that
Some
in
of these
some
programs don't tell you
contexts,
about the
using
portfolio.
an even small amount of copyrighted work was determined to not be fair because the selection was an important part, or actually the heart of the work. So it could be just very small, but so have such an imprint. And that strikes me as a key factor in the consideration of AI training as well. AI is built upon creative works, whether it's art or music or writing. And AI would not exist at all if it couldn't learn from human beings. So the work that AI learns from
And human
seems to me
beings
to
wouldn't have
constitute
knowledge at all if they couldn't
heart
learn from other human beings.
itself.
It's
Now,
like,
the Copyright Office also considers whether the unlicensed use of copyrighted work would harm the existing or future market for the work, and we've heard about that. And we've heard from the creators today about how AI is already doing that. Mr. Altman has been with us this week, and I'm quoting him when he says, "When we're working on new models, where if an AI system is using your content or if it's using your style, you get paid for that."
yeah,
And I
that
hope
like you
this is
have to
gonna follow through
know.
on that because,
Okay, let's just
as,
say
Chairman,
this came to my mind too. You have to already know that I'm sure there's work being done, because a lot of I should say work being done to track the like content creators or the artists or whatever, because I don't think that a company would tell me, like an AI company, I wouldn't expect like a generative AI company to be like, "Hey, you can use our creations for copyright," without at least having some plans at some point to be able to like quantify, source material. So, I mean, nobody's being very apparent about it, which is probably one of the big issues. But it's like me thinking about it from a software perspective, from like a startup perspective. It's like, I wouldn't be expecting Midjourney to just say, "Hey, if you pay this level of membership, then you're allowed to have, free use of like licensing on whatever you create." It's like, I just thought about that. Like, if they are already having that mindset to actually get out in front of it and say, yes, whoever has created this work has the rights to it, I'm sure they're also thinking about how to protect themselves on the back end. Like, wherever the data is coming from that's actually generating that material still has to probably have some levels of source. So, and I mean, I have seen, I think coding has come into play a lot, I have seen where now some of the different LLMs actually, especially that ones that generate code, will actually, cite the different like code sources that they use. I think Bard does that. So I don't know. I just feel like there has to be something in the works because that's the kind of stuff, especially for these bigger companies. And say what you want to say about the whole, like for example, Microsoft owning OpenAI. Like it is what it is at this point. But when you are dealing with companies at that scale, before this conversation ever came to the public eye, they already have to be thinking about stuff like that because they know they have to cover their ass at the end of the day. Because, especially with something like OpenAI and Microsoft is the one that has to ultimately will still have like some type of responsibility at some point. They have to think about that as they are like venturing into that new territory. So I don't know. I'm just interested to see what kind of solutions they have because probably new technologies that we need. Like it's easy to like certain things have metadata on them already. So they said like don't strip the metadata out. That's fair, but also you already stripped metadata out on social media. So you gotta like it's a lot of problems that actually don't have nothing to do with AI. They mostly have to do with how our internet already works. And now that this like generative AI is the thing that we're all talking about, it's like y'all trying to solve underlying issues through, and just putting it on the technology itself. And it's like most of that stuff, they can be separated. Thank you for that alert, Preacher, as well.
Ranking Member Nadler told us Mr. Altman has a lot of money to pay you.
What?
But my first question is for Professor Callison-Birch. Is it a common industry practice to keep a careful record of how and whether copyrighted works, performances, and likenesses were used to develop or train an AI data set?
Thank you, Congresswoman. Yes, it is. In fact, there was a Washington Post interactive feature published about 2 weeks ago, sort of provocatively named The Secret Lists of Websites That Make ChatGPT So Smart. That was produced in collaboration with researchers at AI2, where I'm currently taking my sabbatical. That lets you exactly search for which websites were included in the training data of a very common training set, not necessarily the one that ChatGPT uses, but the one that many people in our industry do use.
And just as a follow-up, do you think that would make it easy to devise a compensation system since we have that trail of what's been used?
That's a great question. So I think the tricky part about creating a compensation scheme is, once again, there are 1 trillion words worth of text in our training data sets. Each author represents a vanishingly small portion of that. We do not reperform any of the songs or texts that are in our corpus. It's not a performance-based compensation scheme that would be possible. So instead, it would have to be something to do with the volume of each person's contribution to that work. And again, I think if you do the math, it'll end up being everyone gets a check for 2 cents, which doesn't make sense.
We have similar things in the music industry, though. But I want to get on to my...
those are orders of magnitude smaller.
Yeah, to my next question, and this is for all three of our artists and creators. Some AI developers...
I did want to say too, Preacher, I agree with what you were saying because we were talking about for the 100 Days of Code, like, there's levels to it. Like some days I probably will write, I probably will spend my whole entire time making a project, and some days I'm just going to be learning because that's the type of journey I'm on right now, which is slightly different than maybe the traditional how 100 Days of Code was originally formed. But I think that I was thinking about what you had said before in Discord because I was realizing like, yes, I am kind of peeking through here and, kind of processing this, but I feel like today I'm a little bit more on the hearing and a little bit less on actually being able to digest anything that is happening on the other screen. So, but then I thought about what you were saying. I'm like, okay, well, that's fine. Because at the end of the day, like this is a part of the process too. So Yeah, it's funny that you brought that up because it's like, yeah, okay, these hearings and stuff, like this is it. This is important information to me, especially, so, and I will say that, especially for anybody that hasn't been around a stream for very long, because I am a teacher, and at the end of the day, I feel like, I usually, the, what we show students as, they're learning about software development tends to be the, happy paths, as we would call it in software, right? So I'm showing you, like, when I get up and teach, and I'm going to give you like a lesson on Git and GitHub and how to use version control. I literally sit down and plan out everything I'm going to do. I plan out the exercises. I plan out the labs. I already know the solutions to all the things I'm going to try to do. Now, I could possibly run into issues along the way, but for the most part, I've already like practiced everything I'm going to do just so that it can be an easy learning experience. But that's not reality. Reality is that, yeah, you might get stuck on one thing and you might mess up kind of how things are set up for yourself, and it could take you a day, 2 days, 3 days, I don't know. Sometimes you get stuck on stuff, and you just got to figure it out. And people don't get to see a lot of that from us as instructors. So that's why I probably would never even on this channel, like, or on this Twitch channel, I probably would never like actually do formal teaching. I'd rather start another channel for that, where it's just, longer courses and workshops and stuff like that, because this is like a space where it's like, this is real life for me, and I can honestly say for y'all right now, if you really want to know how my 100 days of code is, like, if you really want to know how I'm learning AI and machine learning, all you gotta do is watch these streams, because throughout the day, honestly, I don't have time to do this any other time during the day. There's other things I might work on, but for the most part, as like really digging into the tech concepts, learning, even now, like watching this hearing, like, this is my time. So I feel like it's helpful to document it and give that perspective, because I hate to see when people are trying to transition, even if you're already in tech, right? Like, I've been a software engineer for a few years, but now I want to go back to school. Now I want to, go all in on AI ML, which is something that I've been working on since 2017. But, I wanted to show the reality behind it. And that's why I'm also more public about talking about the idea that I do want to do research. I do want to go and pursue a PhD. Maybe I would change my mind, but honestly, I've been wanting to do this for many, many, many years. So I do feel like now is probably the time to start that journey. It's a little bit vulnerable in a sense, because it's hard to be like, yeah, what happens when it's time for me to start applying to schools and all that other kind of stuff, whatever happens is going to be rather public, at least, as far as like anybody that is familiar with the journey that I'm on. So, that can kind of push you to be like, maybe I don't share as much. But again, my whole thing is I'm trying to be show as real of a process as possible. So that's why, like, I talk about, oh, here's a new paper I read, or that's why I'm making the AI ML hub. And like, these are things that I'm doing for myself, and also just trying to, share with anybody else that is, needs a little bit of support, or can benefit from the different resources and everything. But I just I feel like I had to put that out there, because, I swear, it really hurts me whenever I have students, or yeah, a lot of times I'll have students that are like, oh, they're so used to watching YouTube tutorials. And don't get me wrong, because I love YouTube. I learn off YouTube. I literally use YouTube like 24/7, whether it's entertainment or information or whatever. But a YouTube tutorial that's 10 minutes long, that tells you how to, build a CSS animation, that's not a 10-minute process. It's a 10-minute process when you already know exactly how it's supposed to go, and we can cut out all the time. Edited process, maybe it took 10 minutes, but the amount of quote unquote downtime or non-coding time in between that can be vastly different than just, that 10-minute snippet that you see. So that was always my inspiration for the, like why I like live coding, and being on the stream. And I do feel like, Nick Juan, welcome in, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm kind of on the soapbox right now. I'm Meta Dev Girl. Hello. How's it going? What were y'all working on? I was just giving some background because, yes, we are listening to the House hearing. I think I said it was a Senate hearing. Yesterday was a Senate hearing, but we are listening to the House hearing on copyright law and generative AI right now. And I also was given a little bit of a context of, yes, I am on my 100 days of code, but I am pivoting from software to really like finally going all in on my AI and ML journey, which has actually started for me a few years ago. But, here on these live streams, even though I am actually a teacher, I help people learn about software development. But on these live streams, it's just like, this is my life, I actually am about to go back to school and I want to get a PhD in study and do research on AI. So it's a longer journey that I'm going on, but that's the kind of stuff that you will see here. So we were talking about doing 100 days of code and how it can be hard sometimes when your output is not necessarily as, as fully featured as you would expect. I guess you could say, like, you might be on 100 days of code, but you don't, like, it takes you 3 hours just to learn how to do one thing. And now you kind of feel like, oh, well, you didn't meet your requirements because you didn't actually code anything that day. And that's one way to do 100 days of code. But I think it's all about whatever rules you set for yourself, but also basically giving yourself grace. So, for example, today, it's like I am kind of sort of multitasking, but I'm more so focused on the hearing. And I probably won't get through as much of the reading as I even got through last night when I was watching the other hearing. But that's okay, and just making sure that we feel comfortable to know that that's okay, that learning time, that downtime, all that's okay. So that was like the long and short of my brief rant. But thank you all for the follows as well. I see you all, Zenith and RDR fan, and I don't even know. I know this is Japanese for sure, or maybe I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure. And Kumina, maybe. Welcome. I am gonna start the section back up though.
Have suggested that if using copyrighted works is not deemed to be fair use, it would stop the development of AI. But I imagine that most copyright owners would be willing to license their works.
Let me do this too.
To people who they would consent to license their works to.
Actually, Nick, hopefully that you had a good stream. I was watching your stream the other night, I think it was, and I saw something about a data science boot camp. So I couldn't tell if you were running a boot camp or if you are taking a boot camp, but I was just kind of lurking. So I do want to say shout out to Nick, because if you want to follow somebody else that also does things that's data science related and AI ML, then absolutely. Oh, Nick is taking a boot camp. So feel free to share resources or courses. I am currently doing the Fast AI course. Then I'm going to do Hugging Face NLP. And after that, I'm going to do a deep learning specialization. Don't know how my timeline is going to go, but that's my plan right now. And that's in addition to the fact that I'm about to go back to school and just get computer science bachelor's, probably master's, and then PhD. But if I can go straight to PhD, that would be ideal. But got to build up that profile. Got to build up that competitive researching potential profile that will get me into the programs that I so adore.
If a company wanted to license your work for AI, would you be willing to grant permission if you could agree on reasonable compensation? And you go in what
Here, I'll go back on her question just because I
Absolutely, yeah.
kept cutting her
the
off.
heart of AI. Oh.
Cover band and
Who sings like Taylor Swift compared to the AI that sounds like Taylor Swift, and how there's no difference. The difference is that's a middle school child, and I'm not real worried about a middle school child taking over the music industry. So I think we have to differentiate between the two. I yield back.
would the gentleman yield?
This gentleman?
Yeah, would you gentlemen yield for
Oh,
a
of
second?
course, please,
Thank you.
yes.
At some future time, I'd like you to talk, and particularly Mr. Navarro, about how you view the difference between a cover band and AI, and where the guidelines are similar and when they'd be different, and the same, obviously, from a legal standpoint. I won't ask to have it answered at this time where I'm out of time. Thank the gentleman for yielding. We now go to the gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I did
and
not
thank
mean
you
to
to
play
all the
that part
witnesses
again.
For being here today. We've heard multiple perspectives today on whether training AI on unlicensed copyright material should be permitted through the fair use doctrine, and the Copyright Office considers several factors in evaluating this question of fair use. But one of those factors is the amount and how substantial the copyrighted work was that was used. And the guidance notes that in some contexts, using an even small amount of copyrighted work was determined to not be fair because the selection was an important part, or actually the heart of the work. So it could be just very small, but so have such an imprint. And that strikes me as a key factor in the consideration of AI training as well. AI is built upon creative works, whether it's art or music or writing. And AI would not exist at all if it couldn't learn from human beings. So the work that AI learns from seems to me to constitute the heart of AI itself. Now, the Copyright Office also considers whether the unlicensed use of copyrighted work would harm the existing or future market for the work, and we've heard about that. And we've heard from the creators today about how AI is already doing that. Mr. Altman has been with us this week, and I'm quoting him when he says, "When we're working on new models, where if an AI system is using your content or if it's using your style, you get paid for that." And I hope that he's going to follow through on that because, as Chairman or Ranking Member Nadler told us, Mr. Altman has a lot of money to pay you. But my first question is for Professor Callison-Birch. Is it a common industry practice to keep a careful record of how and whether copyrighted works, performances, and likenesses were used to develop or train an AI data set?
Thank you, Congresswoman. Yes, it is. In fact, there was a Washington Post interactive feature published about 2 weeks ago, sort of provocatively named "The Secret Lists of Websites That Make ChatGPT So Smart." That was produced in collaboration with researchers at AI2, where I'm currently taking my sabbatical. That lets you exactly search for which websites were included in the training data of a very common training set, not necessarily the one that ChatGPT uses, but the one that many people in our industry do use.
And just as a follow-up, do you think that would make it easy to devise a compensation system since we have that trail of what's been used?
That's a great question. So I think the tricky part about creating a compensation scheme is, once again, there are 1 trillion words worth of text in our training data sets. Each author represents a vanishingly small portion of that. We do not reperform any of the songs or texts that are in our corpus. It's not a performance-based compensation scheme that would be possible. So instead, it would have to be something to do with the volume of each person's contribution to that work. And again, I think if you do the math, it'll end up
It's
being
still gonna be
everyone gets
like-
a check for 2 cents, which doesn't make sense.
We have similar things in the music industry, though. So, but I want to get.
Can't
on
say it
to
don't
my-
make
Those
sense.
are orders of magnitude smaller.
Yeah.
It exists. Some people want that 1 penny.
our artists and creators. Some AI developers have suggested that if using copyrighted works is not deemed to be fair use, it would stop the development of AI. But I imagine that most copyright owners would be willing to license their works, to people who they would consent to license their works to, given the opportunity. So if a company wanted to license your work for AI, would you be willing to grant permission if you could agree on reasonable compensation? And you go in whatever order you would like to go.
Absolutely, yeah, of course. We're professional people. We get paid to do what we do. So why wouldn't we want to license our work, And the more work we get out there, the better it is for it makes more.
I don't think
incentive for
everybody
everyone to
would
create
have that
if there's
same
compensation
sentiment,
for
but.
creating.
Okay, Mr. Navarro.
The if is the big part of it. If we can agree, absolutely. And if we can't agree, then I retain the right to withhold it.
I agree. Copyright protection is automatic. This can't be an opt-out. It shouldn't require an opt-in. We are protected by copyright, and most visual artists are willing to license their works for various usages. I personally have offered my works for AI training licensing for years, and stock agencies increasingly do sell licenses for AI training.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. We now go to my colleague from California, Mr. Kiley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for putting together today's hearing, which is a very important and timely topic. I have a very open mind on these matters. I'm extremely sympathetic to the concerns raised by the artists and the predicament that they're now in. At the same time, I understand the practical difficulties with some of the ideas that are being proposed, the potential impediments they might pose to innovation. And I'm also wondering whether copyright law is well suited to the matter at hand in a lot of respects, as clearly the copyright clause and the body of law around it did not anticipate sort of a capacity for creation that is non-human in origin. So just to sort of start out, I want to try to analogize this to the process of human creation as best as possible. So Mr. Callison-Birch, you've drawn a distinction between the training process and the output. You mentioned earlier how a child who's learning how to sing by studying Taylor Swift, there's no infringement there. It's the output that is going to be judged, and all of the artists here, I'm sure, could cite artists who have been influences on their style as they developed. So, I mean, let's take another analogy. Let's say that I'm writing an essay on Abraham Lincoln and arguing how he ranks among U.S. presidents. So I go to the library, I check out every book I can possibly get on Abraham Lincoln, I learn all about him, and then I reach an opinion and I write an essay about it. And of course, I'll cite to sources when I'm quoting them directly or for specific facts. But that learning process by which I form my opinion, this is for you, Mr. Damley, is there any copyright claim that is specific to that process?
I think that if to just modify your hypothetical slightly, if you were to go to a library and make photocopies of books, right, that's a copy that you're making of those books, that would be copyright infringement if you didn't have a fair use defense. But I think in your hypothetical, that would be very clearly within the scope of copyright infringement. You're making those copies not to
learn from them,
for which to learn the facts.
You're making the copies to redistribute them.
In those copyright
then that's
materials.
copyright.
And then, yes, you're producing an output that might borrow and those facts into a new work. But that work does, as long as that work does not infringe the original work that you copied from.
But learning from a bunch of sources is not copyright.
A copyright claim, would they look at my learning process, or would they just sort of judge the output? Maybe they would if it's like about intentionality or a damages claim or something, but the core copyright claim, infringement claim itself, would they study my learning process, or would they just look at my work product?
I think it would be all of the above. These copyright cases, having litigated a lot of these, really delve into a lot of the facts. So the Google Books case, for example, it looked at the way in which, the manner in which Google had acquired the copies, but then the outcome was driven mainly by the fact that all that Google was doing was providing a way for you to search within those books, and not providing you the whole book, was providing you just snippets of the book, and said, looking at that whole process, we're going to call the copying and retention of the copies for that end purpose to be fair use.
Interesting. And so one of the things that Mr. Altman said is that he thinks we're moving towards a stage where really most of the training is based upon synthetic data that's generated by the AI itself. Maybe an analogy to this is sort of when, DeepMind was training its Go playing AI. At first it studied the master's games, but then it's eventually just learned how to succeed by playing itself. So does that impact the analysis? This is for either you, Mr. Domwin or Mr. Callison-Birch. Do you have thoughts on that?
This is a very interesting question. So I've done a thought experiment regarding to training AI systems on completely synthetic data. So after having been a panelist on the U.S. Copyright Office, listening to her, I thought about what about our training data do we need in order to learn the facts about the world that we care about and learn the language patterns? So we need examples of language in order to learn the structure and grammar of language, and we need some anchor into how people discuss the world in order to learn facts about it. There's no obligation that be human written text now. I think that in my little armchair experiment, we may have reached a copyright escape velocity where in theory you could have a system like ChatGPT generate 1 trillion words worth of text, which current copyright would be not copyrighted, and then retrain a subsequent system where you throw away the original one entirely. It's not derived from copyrighted works at all, but it still is likely just as performant as the original.
I think that sounds like the same thing.
So I'll just say in closing, I kind of worry that many of the issues we're talking about here might sort of be obsolete within a matter of years, especially as the capabilities of these systems advance. I do think that there will always be a desire for works of purely human creation. I don't know, this is a bad analogy, but we have the grocery store, organic, and the non-organic sections. So I think that is an argument for making sure that we have transparency throughout the process as to when you're dealing with something that was created by an AI.
I think people gonna want AI generated stuff.
We could have different markets, but I do believe there will always be a desire for the works that are produced by the kind of works that are produced by.
Yeah, people gonna have preferences, and then they're gonna choose what they want to choose.
After we all saw the movie War Games and found out that the outcome of tic-tac-toe ultimately is nobody wins, we still have generals, colonels, captains, soldiers, and some of them fighting in Ukraine as we speak. With that, I go to the former U.S. Attorney and my colleague from California, Mr. Schiff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But I should correct the record. I was an assistant U.S. attorney, so as not to think I was promoted more than I was. But thank you.
Humility is also one of the traits I admire in you.
Thank you, Chairman. The explosion of everyday AI use practically overnight has caught the attention of many in the IP space, and for good reason. As many of you know, my constituents in Hollywood and in the entertainment industry and more broadly in California are particularly impacted by the rise of AI, and we eagerly look to see how it will affect the creative industries. A recent analysis of ChatGPT's training sources by the Washington Post found that 11% of the model's input data comes from arts and entertainment, including movies and television, art and design, and entertainment events. Mr. Navarro, I want to echo a remark that you submitted in your testimony today. Technology has long empowered human expression, and AI will be no different. It's true that new technologies have the potential to complement or augment art and have certainly done so in the past. AI can be used to enrich the work of those in the creative industries. But behind all of that work are human artists, people. The copyright system is the foundation for the entire economic marketplace that allows American artists and creatives to earn a living and American companies to create jobs for the sake of producing art. Copyright law must continue to incentivize and protect this activity in the United States and beyond. Blanket AI exemptions do not exist in current law, nor should they for copyright infringement. I wanted to ask two questions. One, Mr. Navarro, and that is, under what circumstances would you be interested, or do you think other artists would be interested in licensing their work for AI? Or do you think there's a broad enough concern about moving away from human-generated music that you think artists shouldn't sell their works to be used for AI, is one question. And then another question for the broader panel, and that is, disinformation is a grave concern with AI. It may very well affect people in the political world, but it will also affect people in the arts. How do you see disinformation about artists or about their works being a danger, and how do you think that can be addressed?
I think certainly the area of disinformation is underscored by the rise in the last few years of the deep fake phenomenon, which I know you, I was at your talk at SAG-AFTRA. I'm on the national board of SAG-AFTRA. And this is a tremendous issue in terms of right of publicity, but even just putting faces on bodies that are doing things those bodies wouldn't do. I don't think that there's a single answer to whether it should or should not be allowed. But what might be right for somebody to have their face put on a body that suddenly is a war hero might be okay. But to have a face put on a body that's doing something pornographic would not be okay. And I don't mean to be indelicate in that, but these are some of the concerns. With regard to music, it's probably a little different. I think that every individual has their own line of demarcation as to what should or should not be done with their work. And I think certainly when you're dealing with the physical countenance of somebody, that the standards and the strictures are going to be greater.
Thank you. And one thing, we held an open hearing in the intelligence community years ago on deepfakes, and among the most chilling observations was that once you see a deepfake, even if you're later persuaded that what you saw was a fake, you never completely lose the lingering negative impression it left with you, so the damage is done when you see it. But would others like to comment on the danger of disinformation to artists?
There's a very important initiative called the C2PA. It's the Content Authenticity Initiative, and it's led by Adobe and others. And they've determined a way to track any changes made to images, whether by AI or otherwise, so that, especially when it comes to photojournalistic images, people can be confident in the provenance of the images that they're looking at. That's C2PA.
Thank you.
I was just going to say that certainly in my own experience, and I'm sure for the other people here, you put in a lot of hours from a very young age to train to do what you do and become really good at it. And, you know, to dismiss that in any way, I think that's the problem that a lot of us are having is, you know, I think it was Malcolm Gladwell who wrote, 10,000 hours. 10,000 hours, you start to know what you're doing. If the machines can do it that quickly, what is the incentive for us to keep going? What really is it? I mean, for years and years and years, for as long as you can remember, go back to the court composers, the arts people have been traded on, they'll do it because they love doing it. They love doing it. And it's true, we do love doing it. But at some point, the love doesn't feed your family. And that's the real harm here, is there has to be a way for us to coexist. That's all we're looking for, really.
Mr. Chairman, may I add a comment? Because I'd like to highlight agreement on this issue.
Quickly.
I am in absolute agreement with the artists on the panel here that this is an important issue and people should not be allowed to imitate another person through deepfakes or through imitation. And I think the right of publicity is something that's very worth considering as you consider legislation on this.
I thank the gentleman. We now go to the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for having this hearing today. This is a really interesting topic, right? I mean, we look at this. I have not ever in my practice done IP work. AI is the next wave or the wave of the future, if you will, of what we're going to be dealing with in this country, really on all spectrums. Mr. Birch, I got a kick out of reading your bio, where your PhD students joke that whenever they ask you anything, your first response is, "Did you ask ChatGPT for that?" I think that really kind of sums up why we're here, right? Mr. Danley, I want to ask you something. Can you, and I've been bouncing around in committee hearings all day, so I may have missed this, but can you identify inadequacies of our existing laws to address copyright protection of AI?
I think that there's a lot of questions that still need to be answered about whether AI output is protectable by copyright and the circumstances in which it is. This is such a new issue. The Copyright Office has put out its guidance, but that guidance really addressed kind of one end of the spectrum of the question, which is where there is virtually no or minimal human input into the creative process. Does the output qualify for copyright protection? And the office says no. But that's just one end of the spectrum. There's a whole area from there to somebody sitting with a paintbrush and painting on a canvas, where you're using technology to assist you in the creative process, whether that's autofocus on a camera, whether that's Photoshop, or indeed whether that's generative AI. And I think generative AI, properly understood, is going to be a tool for human creativity. And if you talk to artists that really have incorporated generative AI into their creative process, they don't see it as a substitute for their own creativity. They see it as a way to enhance their own creativity. And so we're going to have a lot of hard questions in that space where there is really a iterative process between the human author and the generative AI system to determine whether the output of that process is copyrightable.
Do you think we need a completely new set of rules? Does existing contract law maybe cover this? Or is it possible for this to fit in with existing law?
I think existing law is well suited to deal with all of the questions we've been talking about today. Congress had the wisdom in the 1976 Act and various amendments since then to build a technology-neutral, flexible copyright regime. And I think it's proven time and time again that no matter the new technology that comes along, the laws are able to adapt to them. And there are instances where perhaps they're not, and Congress can step in and act in those circumstances. But in general, and I think in this space, I think our existing copyright laws are well suited to handle the questions that as they arise in this space.
When I was reading the guidance for this and reading the CRS report that was issued kind of surrounding this, what struck me was it reminded me of a test in law on whether somebody was an independent contractor or an employee of a company, right? So the test that they look at is the degree of control in which somebody exercises over that individual on whether they're an employee. You can call them an independent contractor all you want to, but if you're the one doing the schedule, you're the one putting in all these requirements and what they do, they're not actually an independent contractor. They're actually an employee at that point. And so to me, there were some similarities there that when we're talking about the degree in which, there's litigation on, hey, create a song that sounds like this and there's no input. But where do we go? Should we be looking at it in that terms, or in those terms, is the degree in which we provide input to AI, to the generated product, as a test?
Thank you, Congressman. I think that's a really useful analogy. And in fact, there is a part of copyright law called the work for hire doctrine that really asks that exact question. The extent to which you exercise as the employer control over the creative output of your employee, or to the extent that they are able to do things on their own, and that determines whether it's a work made for hire or not. And I think that we are, the people that are copyright lawyers are looking at that body of law already as a way to draw analogies in this space, considering the AI as an employee, or is it an independent contractor? Is it running on its own, or does the human author actually have some control over what the AI is outputting? So I think it's a very, very useful analogy. You've sort of anticipated where copyright lawyers already are on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. We now go to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Lofgren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This has been a very useful hearing, and I appreciate the testimony of each of these witnesses. I believe that AI is going to upend a lot of careers, and in fact, the House of Representatives has had 3 bipartisan Congress-wide briefings on AI in the last 2 weeks. It's going to upend the practice of law. It's going to upend the practice of medicine. It'll probably upend engineering. The difference for creators, at least you have some protection in the law, which is copyright, which is absent other professions. And the question is, how will that work to protect creators. I was glad that Mr. Altman, in his testimony, indicated that creators should be compensated and do have rights in that recognition. But, the technology is complicated, and how that is going to work, we don't know yet. I'll disclose that a number of months ago, I put together some creators with the AI people to see if we couldn't have discussions. And I was thinking, honestly, about the Music Modernization Act, which I think was very successful in reaching negotiations so that creators could be compensated. And I'll express some disappointment that progress that I expected to have been made by now has not yet been made. So I'm hoping that those discussions will re-energize. But here's a question, I guess, for Mr. Birch, Professor Birch, and maybe Mr. Sedlick, since you represent different ends of the knowledge base here. We've got basically two questions. You got the input question, which is basically lines of code that have been assembled, and then you've got the output question, which is how much of this is infringing. Is it, in your judgment, even possible to reach an agreement like the Music Modernization Act did so that creators can be fairly compensated?
I think that there are a number of practical issues that make this very difficult to imagine, not least of which is the fact that we're not performing anything when we're outputting something from a system. It's not simply a collage where we're combining elements of existing work. It's genuinely been distilled into a form that's completely different than the original. That, I think, is going to be the crux of what makes this difficult. I think that there might be a market for licensing images and songs and things like that companies end up voluntarily entering
Being
into.
able to
But I don't
maintain a license and what that means to the data over time, that'll be interesting.
As it was for the MMA, which I understand was already very complex.
I hate that I keep talking over them because I couldn't, they don't have the subtitles on this one, but they talk about licensing, but another thing about licensing is that whenever you do have licenses, they typically expire after a certain amount of time. And how is that going to work with models that are already trained on the data, right? Like you have to have a slightly different way that you think about licensing in that case, because you don't like then go back and strip out and retrain every single time a license is like renewed or a license ends. It has to be something more. I mean, not have to, but I imagine it would be something more like, per model run, the license applies to the model run. And, if you decide like, okay, I don't want to continue having a license with, OpenAI being able to use my data for GPT-5, then it's still trained into GPT-4. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I want to see how I get the idea of licensing. I just think the licensing models that we're used to for music is like really easy to back out of that license or to let the license expire. And then once the license, like if Netflix doesn't have the movie no more, they don't have the movie no more. It's not like, oh, well, but the movie was on Netflix when I started my account, so I'm supposed to still be able to watch it. No, it's like, it's just gone now unless they get it back. And they're, it's kind of hard to do that type of thing with trained models.
I don't think that most photographers are concerned or whining about the fact that AI is going to affect, it's going to compete with them in terms of it's easier to create images with AI than it is to create a photograph. It is. What they're concerned with is the use of their works in that system.
The training, yes, the data sets.
Spitting it out as generated AI based on their works and the fact that they're not compensated and it's done without their authorization. Images are data, but they're not merely unprotected facts. An image, my image, is my depiction of a fact applying my creative expression to depict it. And so the copying of that under 106, irrespective of anything else, is an infringement. It's copied into a system. That's infringement right there. In terms of the output, that output may or may not resemble my work. It may or may not infringe on my work. But the input, copying the work under 106, would be an infringement unless, fact specifically, it's fair use.
So that's why I was talking about watermarking and stuff earlier, because it's like how is the model that is scraping the internet able to have these like amazing, quote unquote, I think this is how it's imagined, like how is it that you feel like the models have these like pure depictions of your work if you are being a little bit more, specific about how you actually post your work online? So, like with watermarking, like a lot of times when you go search for images and you want to use some type of stock photos or something, the website itself that you might be going to download the image from, if it's not free to download, they're going to put some type of watermark or grid or something over it. So when you try to download that image, you're going to actually have a distorted image. Like, I don't know. I keep saying it, but it's like there are so many other issues that don't have nothing to do with AI that now we have to kind of solve it all as one big problem. Because so if I go onto a whole bunch of, so hypothetically, right, I want to create a data set. I scrape websites that have like freely posted information, right? It's there. You didn't put a watermark on it. You didn't do none of that. You posted on the internet, and then I scrape that data. Now I'm supposed to be responsible for every single like nook and cranny, when it really like cuts out the fact that there is sites or sources on the internet where this material is shown without any type of like watermarking and stuff like that. So I don't know. I just feel like it's only maybe what they said 3 hearings in, but I haven't seen where they're starting to talk about like this where does the responsibility lie in the sources of a lot of like internet scraping. So y'all need to be calling out these websites. Y'all like that type of work has to be done too, I think. Otherwise it's kind of hard, because it's like you putting it just on the people who are training the models or gathering the data. But like I said, if I'm gathering data from websites that are supposed to have free information that's free to use, and you post on there without protecting yourself and protecting your work of art, then I don't know. I wonder if the companies, especially anybody with generative AI, if they will start to like answer or like pose questions about that.
I thank you for that. As I was listening, I was thinking back to my prior service as a staffer to my predecessor in office, Congressman Don Edwards, and his partnership with Bob Kastemeyer in the 1976 Act, and how the work that they produced has endured to this day to protect the creative forces. But obviously, we need to meld technology to help that protection. Adobe, which is located in my district, actually did the watermarking of their tagging. We actually used that in the January 6th committee to prevent our material from being altered. So I think there's some real possibilities here. I think we've got a long road ahead, but I'm hoping that the discussions that are ongoing can ramp up a little bit, because I think that's probably the most productive way to reach a successful conclusion. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. We now go to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Moran.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that all of you have been sitting there for quite some time, so before I ask my questions, I'd like to pause for a quick musical interlude.
Uh-oh.
Got my heart on my sleeve with a knife in my back. What's with that? Ay, 21, I love him, now my brother, that's my shot. Ay.
I know that was just a short interlude, and all of you would no doubt like to hear the rest of that song. As you heard, it is a rendition of something by Drake and The Weeknd. And many of you, I would suspect, maybe all of you, believe that that is likely their true voices. And in fact, a musical song written and produced by both the Drake and The Weeknd, but in fact it was computer generated using only snippets of those artists' original voices. Even the most ardent fans of Drake and The Weeknd, and I'll admit, they're not my first choice. I'm more of a Toby Mac and Stephen Curtis Chapman guy. But even the most ardent fans didn't realize that that was not their voices. And in fact, in just a few short days, that song garnered over 500,000 streams on Spotify before it was ultimately taken down. I'll also admit that I'm profoundly blown away by the artistic value sitting at this table, but then also concerned about what's going to happen to the creativity if we don't get a hold of this artificial intelligence issue and protect the creativity of human development. Just like what Drake and The Weeknd need protection for, all of human creativity needs protection from, I think, what we're seeing from the artificial intelligence community here. I'm curious if any of you knew that story about that song. Were you all aware that that had happened? And did you guys hear that song before you knew that it was not actually Drake and The Weeknd? Yeah, it's amazing to me that it sounds exactly like them. Mr. Navarro, I want to ask you a couple of questions. Mr. Irwin mentioned 3 primary issues to focus on: consent, credit, and compensation. I appreciated the fact that you mentioned those. Mr. Navarro, as a generational singer and songwriter, why is it not enough just to give credit to an artist if AI uses your voice or prior works as a basis to create something new? Why is credit not enough?
I'm very familiar with this particular case. Royalties are generated. I serve on the Unclaimed Royalties Oversight Committee of the Mechanical Licensing Collective under the Music Modernization Act in the U.S. Copyright Office. Where do those royalties go? Who do they go to? They didn't authorize the use of their voices. AI could be used to put abhorrent words into their mouths. They didn't get their permission. They have contractual relationships with Universal Music, and this operates in violation of it. Many, many entities are harmed by using this without going through whatever the proper channels are. And no means no. If they had said no, no means no.
Yeah, because you mentioned earlier, even if you have credit and compensation, without the consent, it's really nothing more than compulsory licensing. Is that true?
Yes.
Do you consider, Mr. Navarro, derivative AI works from your original works that sound like you to be works in competition with you?
I think they're works superseding me.
Mr. Donnelly, I want to ask you a couple questions because I wrote down some quotes that you had throughout the testimony today, and I couldn't follow some of the consistency in them. I want to read you back some of your quotes. You said at one point, existing law is well suited for everything we are dealing with today, but then at another point, you said people should not be allowed to imitate other works, and then you answered the question, you said earlier, we need to look at other areas of the law other than copyright in order for examples like the Drake and The Weeknd example that I just gave you for protection and examples like that. So are we perfectly suited under existing law, or do we need additional laws to protect artists like the ones sitting at the table?
Thank you, Congressman. And just to clarify, I'm not sure all of those quotes were mine. I think only a couple were.
All of those quotes were yours.
So the question of whether copyright law needs to be changed, I think the answer to that is no. I think our copyright law is, I'm a copyright lawyer, so I sort of focus my testimony on copyright law. I think copyright law is well suited, flexible enough to deal with the copyright questions that are being raised. Now, I acknowledge that there are concerns like with the Drake and Weeknd track that are legitimate and need to be considered. I think copyright law is really a blunt instrument, too blunt an instrument to deal with that. And so it may be worth looking at other areas of law outside of copyright Professor Callison Birch mentioned right of publicity, there's trademark law, there are other areas of law that I'm not expert in that may be better suited to deal with these situations than copyright law.
Okay, and you may be right. Professor Birch may have said people should not be allowed to imitate other works. He may be the one I need to attribute that quote to, so I stand corrected. Not my first time in Congress, won't be my last time. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time today. We appreciate it. It's a complicated issue. We want to get this right. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. We now go to the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Dean.
I thank you, Chairman Issa, Ranking Member Johnson, for holding this important and very interesting hearing. It's also very pleasant to be in the company of this talent and to have us really getting along very, very well because of the subject matter. So thank you, thank you. It's been a real pleasure for me. I know this won't be the last of our hearings. It's really among the first. There's so much to learn. There's so much for me to learn. But we know as lawmakers, we can't wait after widespread societal use to come back and say, what did we do right? What should we have done in advance? We've learned that from other technologies. I want to lay a couple of my biases on the table. I taught for 10 years at a different Philadelphia university. I taught writing, all different levels of writing to students at LaSalle University.
They haven't talked about this very much.
And to very much what most of you have said, Mr. Navarro in particular, I always taught my students, know your craft, understand the mechanics, break the rules when it makes sense, but make sure you place your humanity in whatever you write. That is the genius of what you create, placing humanity in it. My other bias is I'm a copyright holder myself. My son, Harry Canan, and I wrote and published a memoir of his struggles with addiction, our family's struggles with his disease of addiction, but much more importantly, the power and the hope in recovery. We also wrote a children's version of that book, and it was made into an audiobook with the extraordinary generosity of Mr. Paul Williams, writing and producing and performing the background music for our children's book. My son, Pat Canan, is a television writer and movie screenwriter. And so when some of you talk about how long some of this stuff takes to come, I keep saying to Pat, where's the movie? It's years, but maybe we will see his name. He's done real well. I bring those biases to the fore. When I consider what we've seen of generative AI, two questions seem glaringly obvious. So if you'll help me with these. The first is the creation of these models being done in a way that respects the rights and interests of authors, musicians, artists, content creators? To your very point, consent, credit, compensation. If I frame it a different way, is anybody doing this right? Maybe I'll start here with Mr. Sedgwick. Anybody doing it right?
I think that I'm seeing a silver lining on the cloud. Some of the AI platforms are beginning to listen and to adapt their systems to respect rights of authors, or at least they're saying that this is in progress. Okay. There's really two gateways here. There's the gateway to allow works into the databases that are used for ingestion of images into these systems, and then there's also a gateway in terms of the prompts that are entered and also uploading of images as image prompts, copies of our works uploaded by others without our permission as image prompts. Those two gateways are of concern.
And Mr. Navarro and Mr. Irwin, could you offer me your thoughts? Anybody doing this right?
I'm not aware of who's doing it right, but I don't believe that everyone is doing it wrong. I think it's so brand new as that it's the Wild West out there. I think of the earliest days of sampling, when people sampled stuff for records routinely and didn't give credit, compensation, nothing. Now it's routine. Can't Touch This by MC Hammer credits Rick James for Super Freak, and his estate gets compensated. So we're in the process of trying to get it right.
Okay. Mr. Irwin, briefly, if you don't mind, I have one more question to ask.
Yeah, I have no knowledge of anyone doing it right. I think there's starting to be some overtures as to an inquiry as to let's get together and talk about it, but at the moment, no, not to my knowledge, no.
Dr. Callison Birch, in the time I have remaining, I was particularly taken in your testimony by something you said about the impact on labor, on workers. You used the expression, you suggested, will paralegals go the way of the lamplighter? What are the implications for the labor market?
I think this is the large issue that everyone needs to deal with and where Congress can have the most effect. I feel that at the moment we may be on a precipice of mass unemployment. I think the probability is very small, but it's such a dire outcome that you really need to consider some sort of legislation like, in case of emergency, start a new WPA. I think that dealing with this as a copyright issue almost entirely misses the point that these systems are coming, and we've, in America, experienced unemployment as a result of automation before. It's largely affected blue-collar work, but now has the potential to also affect white-collar work as well.
Fascinating. And Mr. Chairman, again, I thank you and I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. We now go to the very patient gentlelady, Ms. Lee of Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses
I take it that
who
will
are
make
here
her
today.
last.
We so appreciate your time and your testimony, helping inform us about how we might embrace the emerging technology of artificial intelligence, but also recognize the immeasurable value of our artists and the need to protect and balance intellectual property and copyright protections. I'd like to return, Mr. Damley, to your testimony, and specifically during the questions by Congressman Moran and Frye, you talked a bit about your perception that existing copyright law was adequate to take on this new emerging landscape and continue to resolve that balancing between the property rights of artists and our new technology that we see. One thing that concerns me is that when Congress fails to be sufficiently clear, we leave to judges the task of figuring it out. And of course, we want judges applying the law, not creating it. We don't want to put judges in the role of being policymakers. So I would like for you to elaborate a little bit more on your conclusion that our existing statutory framework is sufficient to take on this new challenge.
Thank you, Congresswoman. It's an excellent question. I think if you just look at history here, fair use has existed in the copyright law for about almost 200 years. And over that time, it's dealt with lots of massive shifts in technology. 1984, the Supreme Court applied fair use to the then new technology of VCRs and said, applying, again, a 180-year-old law that did not have any understanding of that kind of recording technology, and made a really fact-bound, cautious, careful decision about whether home recording was fair use or not. Fast forward through the era, recently the Supreme Court handled a case involving software APIs. Again, something no one could have ever dreamed of as being a copyright issue 180 years ago. Yet the court, again, looking at the very specific facts of that case, determined that the reuse of software APIs was fair use. And there have been other cases going the other way, looking at new technologies like Napster and saying that is not fair use, that's an exploitive use of the technology. And so my perspective comes from looking at that long history and how copyright law has been able to manage shifts, even major shifts in technology.
And Professor Birch, what's your take on that same question and the conundrum of not over-regulating, but at the same time, not leaving it to courts to try to create policy?
I think that it's worth considering all these issues and deciding whether or not copyright needs to be extended. I think that there's many things that my fellow panelists are talking about that are 100% valid and need to be incorporated into the ethical guidelines that AI system developers create, including right of publicity and copyrighted characters and things like that. And those are not currently covered sufficiently by copyright law. They may be covered by other laws sufficiently, but I think that's where the target should be. Like, what is the output of these systems, and what is correct use and incorrect use of the output of these systems?
And Mr. Navarro, one of the advantages about getting to ask questions near the end is that I can bring to you this one. Is there anything that you wanted to share with the committee today that you have not to this point in the hearing been asked?
That's a good question. First of all, when we look at the ingestion of trillions of pieces of data. That's one way of looking at it. But when we look at the impersonation of voices, that's really one piece of data. And that's very specific. And it's easy to get lost in the shift between the macro and the micro as we figure out where to go on this. I think we need to take a look at both. I think the other is that I appreciate the technology. I appreciate the technical use of terms, but my music isn't data.
And Mr. Irwin, the same question to you. Anything you wish to share with us today that you haven't already testified to?
I'm going to follow on what Dan said. I'm a little distressed that we're calling this training, to be honest, because in my mind we train athletes or animals. We don't train machines. We equip machines with data, as the technology people like to call it, but as we like to call it, music. It's very Orwellian how the tech industry manages to change terminology on us. It's not data and content to us, it's music, it's photographs. It's not file sharing, it's stealing. It's very simple. They're the sort of things I wanted to get into the record that I didn't get to say.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
A brilliant move for such a new member. With that, we go to the gentleman from Maryland for 5 minutes, Mr. Ivey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Ranking Member. Ms. Lee, you stole my question there. I did want to go back to the deep fake issue. And Mr. Sedlick, I think you talked a little bit about technology that exists that allows, that gives the ability to separate out what is real and what is fake. And you said C2 something, and I wanted to get more details on that.
Sure. So a consortium came together, managed, I think, by Adobe or founded by Adobe, and with various industry players. They explored methods of creating a technology that would allow you to use software to determine whether or not an image has been altered and what the provenance of that image is. And that information is stored in the image so that when you're using software to view an image, you can tell whether or not that image has been altered. For example, swapping out a head, changing something, removing something, adding something, any sort of revision to the image to provide that information to the public and to people who might rely on those images, and that is C2PA.
Okay, here's where I'm going with this. So if I guess what you're saying is that, say, a movie or some visual depiction that has the code embedded in it, so that distinction could be made, then you could you have the software to identify it. I guess the question I would have is, what if it's not software generated, or if it's just a visual? Here's sort of the big question. So, for example, body cameras worn by police, and I know this isn't a creative content question, but body cameras have become super relevant in court with respect to police cases, and in many instances, videos. Former President Trump's video in his most recent trial was pretty significant as well. I was sort of curious as if it's AI generated entirely. So you would take the subcomponents of the training piece or whatever, and I apologize. I went to law school instead of any kind of hard science classes, so I'm struggling with the technology terms. But would you be able to tell if an image or a video is generated entirely by an AI approach as opposed to some of it being real or some of it not? Is there a way that you could tell if it's authentic or not?
The AI platforms are doing some work on this and coming forward with technology to be able to allow the public to discern what is AI and what is not. With respect to other types of creations or recordings, like you mentioned,
images and videos have metadata, so it's like you can implement that.
Embed time code and other information in the recording so that you can tell whether or not there's been anything.
So even if it's generated, it should get generated with metadata.
Determining whether an image is AI generated or not, That's right now at the experimental phase with scientists looking at it, image scientists, and I think we're going to see something in the very near future.
Okay. Mr. Navarro, did you have something on that as well? Or?
From a musical standpoint, we sometimes use our taste. I did a touring test at South by Southwest in March where pieces were being played, and I was able to guess about 3/4 of them, but not all of them. Happened to be with very simple forms of music that were style-based. Sometimes the vocals were gibberish. Other times it just were moves made musically that no great musician or great producer would allow. But it gets more difficult. This particular piece that we just heard from the gentleman from Texas, that would have been really, really difficult to tell. And so from that standpoint, I think that's what one of the great dangers is in not knowing the difference.
And Professor Callison-Birch, I wanted to sort of touch base with you on this kind of issue as well. I know we've been talking about copyright law, but from the standpoint of protecting the community, the world, whatever, from these sort of fabrications, which I don't know if they're illegal at this point or not, but are there steps we need to take to address this?
Absolutely. My PhD students have done the largest ever study on human detectability of machine-generated text, and we've found that over time, it's getting harder and harder to detect, but that people can be trained to detect. So I think similarly to how Dan is saying that the latest clip of the fake Drake song is increasingly passable as human, whereas 5 years ago it wouldn't have been. Like, that's a trend that we're on, and I think any sort of basic media literacy that we teach to our children should include this as an element.
Okay, and with respect to visuals, because just from the court standpoint on some of these images, sometimes people's, whether you go to jail or not is determined by a visual or a video clip that a jury might see. I mean, are there ways to make sure that whatever is presented or a judge making a determination about what could be viewed is actually authentic?
There's expert testimony through examination of the images. I think you could likely still detect artifacts of a machine-generated image if it's done carelessly. I think it's going to get harder, so it's certainly something to keep under consideration as time progresses.
All right. Well, I want to thank all of you all for coming in today, and I apologize for a question that's a little off the topic, but I think important for us. And Mr. Chairman, I really wanted to thank you and the ranking member. I agree with some of the previous comments about this being a refreshing change from some of the types of hearings we've had, previously. And I thank you for this.
Well, I thank the gentleman. I will welcome you to the subcommittee, which has historically been extremely bipartisan. So we're going to keep that tradition going when it comes to, we can't pass intellectual property reform except on a completely bipartisan basis. And now, last and probably least, you get me. I'm going to start with this. Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. This is an actual portrait. You'll recognize some of the characters. They're pretty much mostly all dead. Some of them, in fact, all of them, were produced by an artist who took a number of photographs, including Lincoln photographs, in order to produce this product. I am confident that Andy Thomas did not pay for most of the photographs. Do you see a problem in, and I'll start with Mr. Navarro, in that being fair use, the collection of photographs, since for the most part these gentlemen were not available to sit or stand for this portrait?
I think were it me, I probably would have made an attempt to compensate the photographers. I don't know enough about the derivative work clauses in the Copyright Act that can allow something like that. I happen to think that's a wonderful painting. And I'm a Democrat. I still think it's a wonderful
I wanted to bring both because I have another one with all the Democrats. They both hang in my office. You're welcome to come afterwards.
And as such, I mean, my personal opinion is that creativity has been enhanced, and communication has been enhanced. However, were it me, I would have made an attempt to contact the photographers.
And I believe that, you know, he would have bought those pictures if they were commercially available, whether they were under copyright or not. And I point that out because it's one of the challenges that I face in trying to steer this committee now and in the future is I try to look back, as I did there, on existing copyright implementation, existing art.
We're on like the last 10 minutes
Andy
or so.
Thomas, clearly does his own art, but he works off of, even when he's doing a living person, he generally will come in, take pictures, and take those pictures back in order to do his work. It's a style, and it works very well for him, obviously. I ask that more for all of us to opine on afterwards. I do have one similar situation. If we believe Wikipedia as always correct, the Beatles derived their inspiration from, among others, Elvis and Chuck Berry. Elvis gave credit to his inspiration, including none other than Dean Martin. Dean Martin credited the Mills Brothers and Perry Como, and Perry Como gave significant credit to his inspiration to Bing Crosby. Oddly enough, Bing and each of those people were all alive at one point, all entitled to their copyrights at the same time. And yet, we were able to work our way through who, what, where. Every one of these artists undoubtedly took sheet music and practiced with those inspirations that they had, and every one of them listened to those people's recordings, and undoubtedly every one of them performed and tried to do it, at least in training, in that style. So the question I ask, and I'll just go right down the line, starting with Cy. We have a conundrum here at a minimum. If I am taking a class, high school, college, whatever, the material used for that is typically paid for as copyrighted material once in order to educate me. After that, my education, assuming I'm not using the script itself, my education goes forward without further copyright. If I take a significant amount from one of those college books that I purchased on which the copyright was paid, I have an obligation to disclose it, and if it's beyond a snippet, to pay. Is that really what you believe is at the root of how computers, and I apologize to Mr. Irwin, learn or collect data?
I think the analogy is a very close one, both as a legal matter and as Mr. Professor Callison Birch can talk about the technology, but at least as I understand the technology, that is also true as well, that the copyrighted works are being used not to create a collage or record the copyrightable content within them, but to simply learn statistical facts about the works themselves. And it's a very similar process to the way humans learn. Now, the problem with machines is that they learn much more inefficiently than humans do. I can read 3 or 4 books about a topic and then be conversant about that topic and maybe even write my own article about that topic. Machines are not that skilled. They haven't quite caught up to us yet. And so they require, to do a similar kind of learning, they require billions and billions of pieces of work in order to reach those same learnings.
But just because they're a bad student doesn't mean that the copyrighted material shouldn't be paid for, does it?
Now, the question of whether it should be paid for is a different question.
But you're the lawyer, and gentlemen on this end want their work paid for, even if it's used in the classroom. And that's the final part of this question, bringing it all back together, is you two have been very good at calling this education, training, et cetera. And if the analogy of the classroom, of teaching, of learning is there is also the analogy that this copyrighted material is paid for. You know, you didn't go to the public library, so to speak. You went and got this material and ingested it, just as I ingested, for the most part, my college years. So I'll go to Mr. Birch. I really want to get through this for everyone because I think it's part of what brings a close to this hearing.
Thank you. This is a great analogy. So again, I think it highlights the fact that these systems are learning, and they're learning facts about the world, and those facts are not copyrightable. I think where the material is acquired from and whether that's fair use or not fair use is exactly the right question. Many of my students learn by going out to the internet and retrieving facts from the internet. They do not pay for. That is what's happening here. And so I think...
You mean you haven't published a book that you make them buy, like my professors? No
I have not published a book that I forced my
even
students
if
to buy.
even if you publish the book, they're just going to get a freaking PDF and pass it around.
I think what was really interesting in your
I know, right?
Wikipedia piece you read was the word inspiration. And I think inspiration is what we need to keep hold of here, because there's a big difference between getting a book and you want to emulate your idol, you want to emulate the Beatles, or you want to emulate the Rolling Stones. In my case, growing up, my parents bought me sheet music. The sheet music was Mozart or Beethoven. It was public domain, but they still had to buy the sheet music for me to learn. And I learned how Beethoven writes music, and I learned how Mozart writes music, and I learned the Beatles, and I learned all these things, and I learned them. But every time, in your case, the inspiration was, did they hear it on the radio? If they heard it on the radio, there were royalties being paid. If they bought the sheet music, there were royalties being paid. If they bought the record and took it home and played it, there were royalties.
If a model is trained off of literally listening to the radio, because that's like a good example of what I was talking about with websites. If a model is trained off of literally the radio, the rights, the copyright or whatever licensing responsibility has already been handled. So that's the sticky situation.
And that's really where we are now. Yes, they were learning, but that inspiration was paid for at every time along the way.
Senator Navarro.
Mr. Irwin's hit it on the head with the notion of inspiration. I don't think we should ever litigate against inspiration. That's how we evolve as a culture. And I think the beauty of it is that no matter how inspired you are, you're never going to get it perfect. Therein lies the individuality of the subsequent artist, is they bring their own stamp to whatever they learned on. I learned on many singers to develop myself as a singer.
You're not giving credit to one the way the Wikipedia did for these?
Well, no, there are a few. It branches out. But we still change things a little bit. Also, with regard to stuff like that, I spent some years in advertising before I became a professional songwriter and musician. And I date back from the era where if it got too close on the radio, you said, celebrity voice impersonated. You had to reveal it, that it was an impersonation. Lest somebody, Tom Waits and Bette Midler with that. All this is to say is that inspiration should never be stifled. And I'm not interested in stifling technology. We benefit from it. Guardrails, credit, compensation, consent, credit, compensation. Thank you.
Mr. Sedley.
I agree with my colleagues. And your example of the classroom is very insightful. One of the largest areas for copyright licensing is educational use, the textbook industry, and in turn, photography and illustrations being licensed for educational use. If you want to teach in the classroom about B.B. King, you can't use my photograph of B.B. King without licensing that photograph. If you want to teach about me or my photograph of B.B. King, that's going to be fair use. It's true that all artists have been influenced by others, and there's a difference between influence and inspiration or copying or theft. All of our works are made based on our lived experience as humans, and taking those works and being inspired by multiple of them to create For example, the portrait that you showed, if he relied on multiple portraits to create each individual portrait and was inspired by them rather than copying them, then there might not be an infringement there. If he traced it on a light box, if he projected it on the canvas, if he copied all of the expression or the heart of the expression, there might be infringement there. That's a case-by-case, fact-dependent analysis.
And one of the interesting things about Andy Thomas is he manages to capture each of these men, both Republicans and Democrats, better than they were, which is something that a computer probably will take a long time to learn to do. Well, in closing, there are two things that were not discussed fully. One is the fact that even if copyright use is not attributable to a single artist, in other words, the trillion into the works may not be effectively able to be done, it doesn't mean that the ingestion of that material should not somehow go to the benefit of the copyright industry as a whole. And that'll be one of the things that is not a statutory remedy today, but could be. To a certain extent, it's like orphan works. You can't necessarily get them back to somebody, but you don't get to use them completely for free just because we can't assign them. The last one, which was brought up here today, and I'd like all of you to opine on it, because I think it was a real threat, but there wasn't time in this hearing to pick it up. In patents, in copyrights, and in trademarks currently based on some bad actors, computers can generate an infinite amount of combinations. If they generate an infinite amount of combinations of copyright material, they could in fact create a body of copyright that could eclipse future innovation, simply push out tens or hundreds of trillions of songs, of variations of art, and in fact then make a claim, a troll-like claim, that everybody else who comes up with an original piece, there I find enough to say that you took it from me.
I want to know who got that much compute power.
A trillion different outputs. It doesn't sound, it sounds far-fetched until those of you who look at AI and look at the petabytes per minute now that are being ingested on the internet, and you realize that, in fact, infinity is closer to us than we ever thought it was. So I'd like you to opine on that, because one of the challenges that I face is to limit copyright or patent applications or trademark applications that are computer generated if, in fact, they serve only to limit humans' ability to do individual creation. And I'd like you to all opine on that within your own expertise. We'll leave the record open for the next, I think 5 days is the committee rule, but I'll shove it in if I get it later, as long as the chairman lets me. So I want to thank you. I expect that we have your numbers. We will be calling you. You have our contact information. I would hope that you continue to help us. Mr. Ranking Member, do you have any closing statements?
I do not, other than to thank the witnesses for your testimony today.
And with that, we stand adjourned.
Well, that was I feel like I got a lot out of watching that. You too? Yeah, I got a lot out of watching that, and I'm gonna
contributed $300,000 towards research. For
okay, baby.
A number one priority for Microsoft as well is.
I'm gonna rewatch I'm gonna rewatch a lot of this, probably like at 2x speed or something, and kind of gather my thoughts. But I plan on following as many hearings as I can possibly remember to watch or catch, and try to keep up with them in the AI news playlist that I made on the YouTube channel too. So I think that, if anybody else is following this stuff, whenever it's time to have another hearing, we can always talk about it. And I have been looking into, like some people probably saw, I was downloading like witness testimony and stuff like that, because there's a lot of good resources and references, like research papers and different projects, different articles and everything. So it's a lot of good resources in the materials that's provided by the witnesses. So if you get a chance to, like I said, I'm gonna probably just try to put this hub out sooner than later, like, you know, sometime this week. But if you take the time, if you want to dig into it, you can definitely go to either of the committee websites and get more information, see the actual witness testimonies and all the different resources that they contributed as well. So all of that is going on record. So I'm going to check back in after like a week, because the Senate has a week from the hearing to keep the record open, and House has a 5 days from the hearing to keep the record open. So in like about a week, then everything that has been submitted, anything that was submitted after the fact, will also should also kind of be on the record at that point. So yeah, I feel like it was definitely worthwhile, even though I actually did get a decent amount of information kind of digested out of the material that I was kind of slowly reading through as we were going along. So I'm pretty sure I'm caught up. I think it's maybe one more hearing that I actually have to look into, but at this point, you know, I'm pretty much caught up on most of that stuff. So tomorrow I'll probably just spend a lot more time trying to wrap up this. I want to wrap up reading through this chapter of the book so I can go on to the second week of material. So I appreciate everybody for being here, and, you know, raids and follows and everything. I will be back tomorrow. Oh, well, it's today because I'm up again, but I'll be back later today for our day 11 stream. So good night, everybody, and I'll see y'all again soon.